Okay, can you guys hear me now? Sorry, was muted. What I was saying is I'm sorry for starting the stream kind of late tonight. But I just this week I just been so busy with the GTA update and just so many videos. Just been a bit overwhelmed with the with stuff today, or this week I should say. But also I got a lore video coming out tomorrow actually on GTA Online specifically. I think you guys will like it. It's gonna be explaining things about Mr. Faber, but things you might not have noticed about him. But I hope that you guys enjoy it when I make it tomorrow, so make sure to check it out tomorrow. I think you guys will like it. Also, thank you guys for watching my business boost guide that I made. That video is like 81,000 views right now, I think it was. It's like my fastest growing video in a long time. And it means a lot to me that so many people still enjoy my money guides on GT Online. Yeah, that video is so popular. I was actually surprised by how many people liked that video. Like I was surprised that so many people really enjoyed that video. But that video is yeah, 81,000 views about now. So thank you guys for the support on that business boost guide. That helped me out a lot, and I appreciate it. Also, I'm sure the videos helped a lot of people out too. Okay. Okay, I'll see you tonight. Take care, dude. That upgrade is very useful. Thank you, dude. I'm glad you found the video also helpful. Okay, I'll see you, Brandon. Take care, dude. Thank you for making the guide. No problem. How much money do you usually spend on ammo for your guns? I haven't purchased ammo in a long time, like months. I think, yeah, it's been months. Pro, you should try the Ace Combat series one day. You won't regret it, especially the 4K. I've actually played them all. Almost all of them. I have the Ace Combat 1 on the PS1. I have that game. I bought it when when I had my PS1, and I played that game in the 90s. I did, when I was a kid. I even beat that game in the 90s when I was a kid. So that one, I remember the final mission in Ace Combat 1, it was like that really big plane thing you had to blow up on the PS1 game. I remember that one. It was like this giant plane thing. But I never played Ace Combat 2 or 3. Those I didn't play. So the second and third game I didn't play. I did play Ace Combat 4. I still have it on the PS2. I beat that one. I beat Ace Combat 5. I didn't play the Belkan War. Ace Combat 6, I know the whole story, though. And Ace Combat 5, but I didn't play them. Ace Combat 7 I did play, and I beat it. And I'll get Ace Combat 8 when that comes out.
Hey, you! Get out of here! Listen up, idiot! Scram!
Oh yeah, we're gonna do both Saints Row and Red Dead Redemption 2 this next year. Yeah, we'll do it. I did see the trailer for Ace Combat 8. Yep, I did see it. Yeah, I gotta play the old GTA games also. Those were, you know, heavily requested games. I know that. Five Nights at Freddy's, maybe. I could maybe do that for Halloween next year. Thank you, Harvey. Thanks for the super chat. Hey, Pro, Broly is me and your posse. Oh, okay. Hey, Shadow Narwhal, thank you for the super chat. Can you help me refute Marxism? What do you mean refute it? When you say you're arguing with somebody over it?
What in all hell? Damn it!
Well, do you there's a number of ways that you can refute communism. There's so many different arguments to refute it. There is the economic argument on why it's a failure, and then there's also the what would I say, the social argument on why it's a failure also. Which one would you want me to tell you about? Because both of the explanations are a little bit long. I know about the God mode glitch. Yeah, I'm aware of it. I know about it, but I don't really play in public lobbies, so I don't really I guess it's still annoying, but it doesn't really affect me that much. My favorite mission in the DLC, Home Sweet Home, the Michael mission. Is there a way to contact you by like social media or any way? Yes. You can email me by my business email. It's on my About Me page on my YouTube. You know, you can send me, what you want there. A lot of people actually send me fan mail there, just fan emails, and stuff. So yeah, you could, if you want to send me something in private, you could email me there. 26 is gonna eat, and leave no crumbs. Wolverine, Lego Batman, GTA 6, game anniversary, Spider-Man to start, but man, we're gonna be stacked next year. A lot of games, yeah. Thank you, Blinded Eagle, for sponsoring my channel for 2.5 years. Thank you, dude. But anyways,
Damn journey.
you were asking me earlier about like communism. So I'll tell you the social argument on why communism is a failure, and that is that human progress throughout all of human civilization, since basically the first human civilization, since ancient Sumer, which was arguably probably the first recorded civilization on Earth, human progress since the beginning of time basically has revolved around it's revolved around incentive and reward. That's basically what it is when you really think about it. Humans have always done something because they want a reward. They want something, money, other valuables, something. That's basically what drives hard work and drives incentive, is the getting rewarded. So people know they're going to get rewarded. They're going to get paid more if they do something, they produce something, they're going to do that. If people are not getting that extra reward, if there is no incentive, then people are not going to put in the effort to basically create something, to do something. This is the exact reason on why almost all communist countries never have any kind of famous products. Nothing. Like really, when you think about it, and think about all the communist countries that have existed in the history, not just the Soviet Union, just think like, China, Cuba, North Korea, you got so many, Angola, Burkina Faso, Somalia, Ethiopia, I'm trying to think other communist countries, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, there's just so many down the list that you can go. Myanmar, there is another one, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. When you really think of these, all these communist countries, have any of these countries ever made a famous product? Anything? Like, anything famous? Have they ever exported anything? Like, have any of these communist countries made something? And I'm not talking natural resources, because natural resources like oil and stuff like that, that's based on the land, what's in there. I'm talking about actually creating something. Has any communist country ever created something, like an actual product, that the rest of the world basically said, we want that, we want that, sell that to us? Like, have they, any country, any communist country ever made anything like that? Because I can't think of anything. I can't think of any export, like any famous thing that a communist country has made, like a product, that other, countries from all over the world wanted. The only thing that I can think of that was actually a very successful communist export was the AK-47. That's the only thing that I can think of that was a successful, export. And because, the AK-47 is probably one of the greatest rifles ever made. You can maybe make the argument it's the best rifle ever made. But there is but that's more of a gun. That's just something that the military's used. So really, there's nothing, no product that the communist countries have made that anybody has, wanted to export. Well, you can say tanks, but we're talking like products. Like, I mean, just look at what America made. Microwaves, refrigerators, toasters, stuff like that, washing machines. These are things that that people want. Televisions, stuff that other countries want, that provides entertainment, helps people out. But like, have communist countries ever made anything like that? No. There's not any kind of product that they've made that they've exported that's been successful. So that's what I'll say about it. So that's basically the argument that you can use against, you asked me earlier, what argument it can use against communism. Pretty much that is that, there's no incentive. There's no drive to try to, work hard. There's no drive to try to push for anything. If everybody's going to be basically paid the exact same. Hey, Pro, there was a bunch of lore videos after your latest GTA San Andreas playthrough that you would make, but you never did. Why? Like, I know, like, there was a Torino lore video and the Russian Mafia lore video that I was going to make. I just didn't get time to it last year. But I have a San Andreas lore video that I'm actually working on right now. So that's actually going to be one of them. It's going to come out before the end of December, so you see that. Hey, Appalachian, is my YouTube profile, picture South Park style? Yeah, it's based around that. It's inspired by it. Yeah. What about the first satellite? That's not an export though. That's just something the government made. We're talking about something that like communist countries have made that other countries want. It doesn't really happen. Yeah, I mean, you could also, TK. Can't talk about communism without capitalist intervention. Well, here's one thing I'll tell you about this. Look. Here, if communist countries, right? Communist countries always talk about how, they say, we're self-sufficient. Stuff like that. We're self-sufficient. We don't need capitalism. Like they always say, the capitalist countries are going to die out and the communist countries are going to remain. When ironically, it was the communist countries that died out and the capitalist countries have remained. But here's, like, if you take a look at a few countries, like if you look at a country like Cuba, for example, Cuba's the communist country that still exists today that we can think of. Cuba has had the U.S. embargo on it since the 60s, basically. And what Cuba basically does is whenever there's any kind of economic problems in Cuba, there's long lines to get food, everything's so overpriced. The government always says, oh, it's because of the sanctions. The sanctions are causing this, the embargo. But the embargo doesn't even really affect food or medicine. That's all on Cuba. And here's the thing is, there's nothing to stop Cuba from trading with the rest of the world. They can trade with the rest of the world. America can't trade with them, but they can basically trade with the rest of the world. And so here's the thing about this when you think about this. The communist countries say we're self-sufficient. They say that. We're self-sufficient. We don't need capitalism. But then they say, oh, the capitalist countries have sanctioned us. That's why we're having economic problems. You see how that doesn't make sense? They say we're self-sufficient. We're communists. We don't need capitalist countries. And then they say, oh, the capitalist countries have sanctioned us. Now, that's why we're having economic problems. I thought you said you were self-sufficient. So that's ultimately that. Is that these problems that are happening in Cuba are largely because of their crappy economic system. It's not even because of the embargo. And to be frank, I don't even support the embargo. I'm not a fan of it. I don't support the sanctions against Cuba. What I'm saying is that these sanctions, these embargoes, are not what's causing the economic problems. It is primarily their crappy system that's what's causing it. And I will say this: how ironic is that if you need to trade with America, which is the largest capitalist country in the planet, like if you need to trade with the largest capitalist country in the planet to survive your little, communist utopia, that basically shows that your communist utopia has basically been a failure from the start. If you need to trade with America in order to keep your communist utopia afloat, that basically shows that it was always a disaster from the start. That's ultimately it. Hey, Pro, just finish your Yakuza Kiwami Part 3. You play good. Thank you, dude. I hope my fighting style is good. I'm trying to get good at the combat. I'm trying to get better at it. What do you think of the UN's failure in East Timor? Is horrible. Australia had to occupy East Timor until the mid 1990s because of the violence that they allowed to happen. I'm not talking about sanctions though. I'm talking about the Alphabet agency. What is it here? Staging coups that they've admitted to unclassifying recently. Okay. Has the CIA done horrible things? Has the CIA done really bad coups and supported dictators? Of course. You know, they were involved in the drug trade. They also smuggled drugs into America. You know, if I was president, I would disband the CIA. But here's the thing: is the problems that go on in these communist countries are not because of the CIA. So has the CIA done a lot of really bad things in other countries? Sure. But at the end of the day, the communist countries are a disaster because they themselves are a disaster. Their system just sucks. That's ultimately at the end of the day what's causing a lot of these problems. And also the other thing you're not mentioning coups done by communist countries. Do you have any idea how many coups the KGB and the Soviets have done? The Soviets supported a lot of coups in a lot of countries during the Cold War. So it wasn't just the CIA that was overthrowing countries. The Soviet Union interfered in a lot of countries. The Soviet Union invaded a lot of countries also. You know, a lot of people talk about America invading Vietnam, but the Soviet Union actually invaded more countries than America did during the Cold War. A lot of people don't know that. So, you know, Soviet Union, even if you go back to, the start of World War II, was it Poland? It was Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. You had all of those countries in Europe. And then what happened is the Soviets also invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968. They invaded Hungary in 1956. They invaded Afghanistan in 1979.
Can't be serious.
So, yeah, that's what I'll say about that is, let me see here. Part of why Chernobyl was so bad was communist corner cutting. I believe that the USSR also lost like 400 RTGs, radioisotope thermal generators. Yeah, and what probably the most historically accurate thing in the Chernobyl, like the HBO Chernobyl TV show, was when they tried to show like the communist cover up. That's what it was. Because that's what the Soviet Union was like, is they would never admit to any kind of mistakes. They would always downplay things, and then they would just blame the West. That's basically how it was. They would just blame the West for everything. You know, there's even conspiracy theories, even in like modern Russia today, that the U.S. government was responsible for the Chernobyl disaster. Like, there's actual conspiracies like that.
Don't worry, I'll take him from here.
So like a lot of times they could never admit to the stupid things they've done. What's the most dangerous country in the West? Probably Haiti. Hot take: Activision should get the volition treatment and cease to exist. All parties would benefit from that because Black Ops 7 is a company destroyer. Yeah, Black Ops 7 was terrible. I agree with you, Exquisite Vibes, and thank you, Appalachian, also. Hey, professional. What would Red Dead Redemption 3 take place? Should be. I think Red Dead Redemption 3 should place at Jack. It should be a new story. That's what I think. Professional, how do you keep up with information like this? I know you read a lot, but I think you also research about it. The thing is, I read, I research, and I talk. That's what I do. And so I know people that grew up in communist countries, and a lot of times it's also really good to talk to somebody about the experiences they've had, because that's a very unique experience that you're not really gonna get in like history textbooks and stuff like that. And like a lot of times, my parents have told me all these horrible stories about when they grew up in communism in Eastern Europe, how bad it was, and just a lot of like really really bad things. Do you keep up with current events? For the most part, yeah. On my About Me page, there should be my business link, business email, TK. It should be like About Me. It says like for business inquiries, and you just click on that and it should reveal it. Norway is socialist and China is communist, and they're really successful, but I don't support those ideologies. No, dude. You got it all wrong. Norway is not a socialist country. Um, Here, let me see. What am I gonna go here? Go Moonshine. Look, here's the thing: is people say, for example, that Norway is a socialist country. Like, I hear this all the time. But here's the reality of it about Norway. Norway is how I would describe it, a capitalist country with a very generous social programs. That is basically how I would describe Norway. It is not a socialist country. And here's the thing. If you go to Norway, right, and you talk to the Norwegians and you ask them, are you socialist? They'll say, no, we're not socialists. And like the Norwegian government won't say that they're socialist either. They won't. They don't know. No, we're not socialists. We don't support that. Do you know what a socialist country is? Venezuela. That's what a socialist country is. Venezuela is a socialist country. And China, is China a communist country? It's kind of complicated. How I would describe China, China is socially communist. That's how China is, like, socially, they're communist, but economically, they are a socialist market economy. They're not even a full capitalist country. They're more of a socialist market economy. But the reason that China has been more of a success than Venezuela is because China has, been able to capitalize their ports really well, and also China has a lot of resources, but on top of that, China trades huge parts of the world and produces for huge parts of the world. That's why it hasn't fallen apart like Venezuela. That doesn't mean necessarily that China is a success. That's what I'll say about that. Because, and here's the thing is, I will tell you guys something. Like, for example, I think that China is the second largest economy in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's the second largest economy, right? And what people do is people look at like a country like China and they say, oh, because it's the second largest economy in the world, that means that it's a successful country. That's what people, but just because when people say it's the second most successful economy in the world, they're talking about GDP. What GDP is, gross domestic product. It means all of the money in the country, everything in the country, the whole value of the country. That's basically what that is, how much that country produces in a year. So does China have a lot of money in it? Yes. Does China produce a lot of stuff every year? Yes. Does China make a lot of money through trade? Yes. But then take a look at, how does the average Chinese person live? The average Chinese person, sure, they live better than the average Cuban and the average Venezuelan, but if you compare them to the average American has a much better life than the average, Chinese person. And I will say about this, like, if you look at a country like Poland I don't think is even in the top 20 largest economies in the world. What country would you rather live in? Would you rather live in Poland, or would you rather live in China? So that whole argument that when people say, like, well, it's the second largest economy in the world, and so it's a successful country, no. Just because it's the second largest economy in the world does not mean it's a successful country. What I consider success is that the people in the country are actually living a good, productive life. That's what I would, consider a successful country. The people are generally happy and they're living a good and productive life. And going back to Norway, when people say that Norway is a socialist country, what people are looking at is they're looking at the social programs, because Norway has, universal healthcare and universal education. But just because a country has universal healthcare and universal education does not make it a socialist country. Most European countries have universal healthcare and universal education. Poland has that as well. And Poland does not consider themselves socialist at all. Poland is actually the most anti-socialist country in Europe. Like, if you go to Poland, that's where our parents are from, Poles absolutely hate socialists. They despise socialists. But in their country, there is universal healthcare and universal education. So Poles don't consider themselves socialists. So having universal education and universal healthcare does not make a country socialist. That's, what makes a country socialist is when the country actually starts nationalizing key parts of the economy. And infrastructure. Like, for example, the difference between, like, Norway and Venezuela is that in Norway, let's say I'm an American businessman, right? And I want to do business with a Norwegian company. I go to Norway, and, I get their temporary visa or whatever it is. I'm sure they have some kind of business visa for businessmen. I go to Norway for, like, a business meeting for, like, a couple months to, like, help set up some new company, right? That's, like, going to be working with, like, through Norway and America. The Norwegians would basically be like, okay, come on in. They would be like, come on in, come do business with us. And I would have to, like, pay their tax, probably get a business license in Norway, and all of that other stuff. But at the end of the day, I as an American can still do business in Norway. Now, if I was an American businessman and I tried to go to a country like Venezuela and I said, okay, let's set up a company here in Venezuela, we're going to trade and work with the Venezuelans, the Venezuelan government would be like, they'd be like, no, get the hell out of here. They wouldn't even do business with me. So that's the difference between a country like Norway and a country like Venezuela. In Venezuela, they've nationalized everything. The Venezuelans nationalized transportation. They nationalized gasoline. They have nationalized even supermarkets, stores where you buy food has been nationalized. So like the government basically just controls everything. They basically strangle private industry in their country, which is what's causing these massive economic problems in Venezuela. And so that's what a true socialist country is. A true socialist country isn't Norway. It is Venezuela. And at the end of the day, where would you rather live? Would you rather live in Norway or would you rather live in Venezuela? That's it. What I'll say about that. And look, the average poor person in Norway lives better than the average, I would say, working class, probably even middle class person in Venezuela. So that's what I'll say about that, is that Venezuela is just a complete disaster. I would never want to live in a country like Venezuela. It's a complete disaster. Speaking of Venezuela, have you played Mercenaries 2? Yes, I have. And I love Mercenaries 2. It's a great game. I want to make a playthrough of Mercenaries, but I might do that in February. But I know if I start playing that game, people are gonna start talking about the current events. I know that because it's like a lot of crap going on in Venezuela right now. Thoughts on Tajikistan? Thank you for the super chat, Exquisite Vibes. Tajikistan, that is a country that is in Central Asia. It borders China, Russia, and Afghanistan. Correct? Yeah, China, Russia, Afghanistan, borders it. And about Tajikistan, Tajikistan actually used to be a bigger country back in the day. But China, it was like 10 or 15 years ago, China actually claimed parts of Tajikistan as their own country. And they said that these are historically Chinese lands, which I don't even know what the hell the Chinese government was talking about, because, Lily, that is so far west China. Like, how could China even make land claims like that? But they made land claims to Tajikistan, and they threatened Tajikistan, and they told us, you give us this land or we're going to invade your country. And Tajikistan, being such a poor country, just surrendered and just gave up the land to China. And China annexed it. So that was they stole land from Tajikistan. And also about Tajikistan is it's a very poor country, but a lot of Tajikistan's energy actually runs on hydro dams, because the Soviet Union actually made some of the largest dams in the world actually in Tajikistan. I think Tajikistan might actually have the largest dam in the world, and so Tajikistan still runs those old Soviet dams, and that's basically how they power a huge part of their country. But that's the backstory of it. And also, when it came to Battlefield 6, Battlefield 6 was very accurate in what Tajikistan looked like. Like, when you see the maps of Tajikistan, it's very accurate to the geography, very accurate even to the buildings, the towns. So it's like, if you just look at pictures of Tajikistan on Google and you compare to Battlefield 6, you'll be surprised how accurate it is. The developers did a lot of research into what Tajikistan looks like when they did, Battlefield 6. I keep seeing China apologists say China ended a bunch of poverty and a bunch of stuff, but I know it's all BS. Yeah, and I will tell you something, that what the Chinese government does is the Chinese government actively spreads propaganda online. Like I'm not just talking, some of those Chinese apologists that you see might actually be paid, agents of the Chinese government. China actually has a whole network of people that they pay to actually spread propaganda about China. And if you want to see an example of Chinese propaganda, you want to see an example of it, how bad it is, Chinese propagandists have taken over this site, Quora. Does anybody know Quora? Quora is basically this, this question site. So how Quora works is you can post a question on Quora, and the question can be anything: religious, political, it can even questions on cooking, mechanical, anything. So you can ask anything on Quora, and what people do is people make accounts and they reply to you, with answers. Now, about that site, Chinese, bots have taken over that site really badly. Let me see, make a mission here. Paid killing.
Take your time there.
Okay, mute Sean here. So look, about Quora, what I was saying. On that site, the Chinese propagandists have taken over that site so badly. So badly. Because if you go on any question about China on that site, just look up anything about China, anything negative about China on Quora, anything, and the entire comment section, all the top answers, the top answers will always be pro-China comments, all of them. I was disgusted by it. They have literally taken over that site. There is just so much bots, Chinese bots on that site. Just go on Quora when you get the chance and just look up anything criticizing China, but make sure it's a big post, because the smaller posts, they don't really have the bots on it, but if it's anything a big post with a few thousand views, it's going to have those Chinese bots on it, and they are so common on sites like Quora. They are just all over the place. If you just look up anything about like human rights or anything about like Tibet, or you look up like Taiwan or anything about censorship in China, like all the bots will basically be saying, oh, that's Western propaganda. China is basically this great place. It's like, false propaganda demonizing our country and stuff like that. And the thing I'll say about this is most of the people that are replying on there have like, very stereotypical like American names. Like you'll see like a name like William Johnson. Like, somebody will like have like a name like that when there is no William Johnson. It's basically just some guy in China on a VPN that is typing up that stuff. So like they'll have like pictures of like Americans and like American like sounding names, but it will be very much Chinese bots that are doing that stuff. And the ironic thing about that is that Quora, the site itself, is actually illegal in China. So you cannot use that site in China, but these bots, they are using VPNs on behalf of the Chinese government and are basically spreading this misinformation. And so whenever people look up like questions about China, like asking things about China, all the top answers will be just pro-China, comments that have basically been voted up by these bots. And people will think, oh, this is a reliable answer. This is, the top answer that was the most voted on. And basically it's a way to basically sway public opinion and get like Westerners to basically support the government of China. That's ultimately why they do stuff like that. So there's just so many of these propagandists online, and honestly it just disgusts me, stuff like this. Like I remember there was a couple years ago when I was on Twitter, right? When I was on Twitter, there was this I try to remember what it was. It was like a tweet of talking about Taiwan like a couple years ago, and I replied to the tweet, and then there was like this Chinese propagandist that started replying to me. And the thing is, this one didn't have like an American name. This one was clearly in China, so it was like a Chinese name with Chinese characters, and I could tell that this account was from China. But they started replying to me, telling me I was spreading American propaganda and a bunch of this other stuff. And I said, when I replied to them, I said to them, oh, you can argue with me here, but Twitter is actually illegal in your country, so you're using a VPN. I literally said that to the Chinese bot. I said, you can argue with me all you want here, but in your country, you can't even use Twitter. So, like, Twitter is illegal in your country. And you know what the Chinese bot replied to me with? The Chinese bot started saying to me, well, what about your country? In your country, like, Huawei is banned, which Huawei was the Chinese, like, cell phone service. And so, you see what they did? They didn't even answer my point on Twitter. They just replied to me, just, what about it? Well, what about this? What about, like, when America is, like, banning Huawei? And here's the difference. China banned Twitter because they didn't want other opinions being shown. They didn't want, their people seeing other opinions that were negative about China. That's the reason they banned Twitter. It was basically to control information. The reason that America banned Huawei had nothing to do with information or anything like that. The reason America banned it was because it was a Chinese cell phone service, and there was a huge risk that it was possible spyware for the Chinese government, because China is a dictatorship, and they're selling like cell phones in America that could basically be recording and listening to conversations and spying on people. That was the reason that it was banned, not because of some free speech like they banned Twitter. So it was like a completely different thing, apples and oranges. But this Chinese bot was like, making like a big deal out of it, saying, oh, what about Huawei, when they completely ignored my point about what I said about the about Twitter being banned. But yeah, that's it. That's the ironic thing about like these Chinese bots, is they'll go on places like Twitter, they'll go on places like on YouTube, all of these places, when these places are actually illegal in China. You can't go on these sites in China because it's all blocked in China. But that's basically what they'll do. It's just so hypocritical and just so ironic. But that's basically it. That's the best way to piss those guys off. If you're ever on like YouTube or Twitter or Quora and you see these Chinese bots, if you want to really piss them off, just reply to them and just say to them, oh, this stuff is illegal in China in the first place. You can't use Twitter or YouTube or whatever else service in China. And that'll really get them pissed off. But that's it, because they don't really have an argument against that. They can't really disprove that, because it's a fact that those sites are illegal in China. I hope I answered your question there, Shadow Narwhal. Let's see. Hey, Pro, I'm thinking of starting a second channel for playthroughs, and wondering if you had any advice for starting a brand new channel doing that. Hey, Pro Zero, thank you for the, super chat. You're starting a second channel for playthroughs, and wondering if you had any advice for starting a brand new channel. I got a question for you, though. What's wrong with your current channel? Like, why don't you want to do the playthroughs on your current channel? Why do you want to make a second channel for that? India banned TikTok because of this reason also. Yeah, India banned TikTok because of the security reasons, because it was run by China. And here's the thing is, in the United States, if you are part of the United States military, or you are working in the government, you are not allowed to have TikTok on your phone. You can't. So, like, if you are in the military or you're working for the government, you cannot have TikTok on your phone. They will kick you out. They will not hire you. They'll fire you, or you get disciplined for that. And there's a reason that you can't have that on your phone, because it's possible, like, communist spyware. basically. Pro, can remaining silent be used against you? Not really, no. Uh, the thing is the police can't use that against you. So if you basically, plead the fifth, if you say that I don't want, I will not answer questions, I want my lawyer present, they can't bring that up during trial. They can't say, oh, he didn't want to answer questions. They can't say stuff like that because, to be fair, that's not really evidence against somebody. And there's a reason that they can't use that in court, because not wanting to talk to the police is not an admission of guilt. So that's it. That's not how a lot of other countries don't see it that way. But in America, we that's how we see it, is that not talking to the police is not an admission of guilt. Just because you don't want to talk to the police does not mean that you had something to do with it or you're guilty. That's it. So if the police try to basically use your silence against you, or the prosecution tries to, use your silence against you, they're violating your constitutional rights. That's basically it. And I don't want to get into the whole political drama here. The only thing that I'll say about this is that there was a famous case that happened a couple years ago, and this case happened in Wisconsin. There was a shooting, and the guy ended up getting not guilty. But anyways, about the case, what happened was the guy actually did not want to answer questions. And what happened was the prosecutor actually tried to use that against him during the trial. It's actually on film, where he said, like, you were not, talking to the investigators. And the judge got really mad and said, you can't do that. You cannot, use his silence against him. And that was one of the reasons the guy won the trial. That's one of the reasons he was declared not guilty, because the prosecution tried to use that against him when you can't do that. Just because, you don't talk to the police does not mean that you are guilty. But that's, yeah. Lots of innocent people easily talk themselves into crimes as well. And here, this is what's so important about this stuff is that, look, even if you are 100% innocent, right? Like a lot of people think if I'm 100% innocent that I should not I should tell the police everything and stuff like that. But what some cops will do is some cops will actually twist your words and try to get you into stuff. And they'll basically be like when what might happen is you might for example, you might see a crime happening or something like that, and you'll say like, oh yeah, it was around 4 o'clock when it happened, but it might have been like around 4:10 when it actually happened, and you were just mistaken. You weren't necessarily lying, but you were just mistaken about the exact time when it happened. You just remembered it was around 4 o'clock, but it wasn't exactly 4 o'clock. It was 4:10 when it happened. This is just an example. And then they might use that against you and say, did you have something to do with that? You said it was right around 4 o'clock, but it was actually 4:10 when it happened. So you see how even if you're innocent, some cops, they can be such scumbags where basically they'll just use stuff like that against you. So they'll make stuff up, try to basically play with words in your mouth. And so that's what I'll say about that, is that sometimes it's better to basically just say talk to my lawyer, stuff like that. That's it. Yes, Shadow Narwhal. Let me see here. Mercenaries 2 makes me want to buy a Cadillac Escalade EXT, painted black, put the UP logo on it, and put a mount for M2 Browning and MK19 on top. Yeah, those SUVs are really fun. But I think my favorite vehicle in Mercenaries 2, what was my favorite vehicle in Mercenaries 2? It was probably the Chinese attack helicopter, the one with all those missiles. It had all those unguided missiles. That was pretty fun. Do you think the U.S. can elect a communist president or become a communist country? No. Here's the thing is, you have a better chance of winning the lottery than America has electing a communist. Bernie Sanders should have been the presidential nominee instead of Biden. I thank you for the super chat, Pones. I'm gonna stay away from the political drama. The only thing I'll say about that is I'll just say that he would have been a much stronger candidate. That's what I would say, but than Biden. But yeah, I don't want to get into the whole political drama. I stay away from that for the most part. Destroying Fiona's car. Remember that? She gets so pissed. How are video games and internet regulated in China? In China, the PlayStation Store is like a joke in China. There's only 50 games on the PlayStation Store in China. And you might think that that's a lot, but there's actually I think thousands of games in total in the PlayStation Store alone. in like the U.S. version. So that's what yeah, it's a joke. Did I watch the Hell Let Loose Vietnam gameplay trailer? Yes, I did. The Chinese vehicles were so hard to hijack. Oh yeah, the tanks were the worst. Like you had to just spam the button, like button mash them. Yeah, I remember that. Oh crap. Your Yakuza Kiwami almost looks like Hudson. Oh, it does. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Minion Dave. Pat, what hurts me about that kid I keep mentioning, what's worse is I have a friend, who is trans, and when I heard about it, I feel worried and mad because my friend is nicer than him. Well, look, if you have somebody, like, in your class that's just being, like, nasty to you, the best thing to do is to just tell a teacher about that. Tell a teacher, tell a counselor, and the best is not to also interact with the bullies, because if somebody sees that if somebody sees that you're getting pissed off, aggravated, they are going to keep doing it. I mean, just look at how I also deal with griefers. You know, when people grief me, I barely acknowledge them. Like, I just pretend like they don't exist, and they get really mad about that stuff. Let me see here. Do I support free universal healthcare in the U.S.? Thank you, Pones, for the super chat. Here's what I will say about that. I don't think that there's anything that's free, because like people say, like, oh, like I see you have like Australian money, so I'm assuming you're in Australia. Like, Australia has universal healthcare. Like, people say like Australia has free healthcare, but I wouldn't say that it has free healthcare, because you're still paying for it. You're paying like what, 40% in taxes, so that you can have that as a service. Now, it's a service technically, yes, but it's not a free service. That's, I think, the biggest misconception that people make about that. I wouldn't say it's free, because it's a taxpayer service. That's what it is. Now, do I support it? I don't really want to get into that. That stuff, it's just, more political stuff. I don't really want to get into that. My current channel is well established in another niche, and if I started doing playthroughs in this one, views would go down, and I need the income as a college student. Okay. I mean, if you want to do that, I do just everything on my channel, like, just regardless of the views. So I just do all kinds of stuff. Some people don't like all the mix of videos that I put out, but that's just how I do things on my channel. Thank you, Pro Zero. How would you improve capitalism? Honestly, nothing really. Just keep the government out of it. That's basically it. Is that the more you keep the government out of the economy, the better that I think it will be, honestly. That's how I think. I think the less the government is involved in the economy, I think the better. But I know there are some aspects where the government should get involved in the economy. But for the most part, I think if the government stayed out of the economy, stopped printing so much money, I think it would be better. But I will say something. Government intervention. I would support government intervention in one thing, in one aspect. So as somebody who's like in the real estate market, because I'm a landlord, I own 2 rental properties. As somebody who owns rental properties, somebody who works with tenants, I would tell you that what I personally think the government should do is, I think, and I don't even think the federal government should do this, I think it should be more of a state issue, but I think that state governments should pass some kind of law that basically prevents, like, large companies from buying up land, like, just buying up a ton of land. I'm not saying that large companies should be banned from buying land. Like, if they want to buy land, they should be able to. I mean, it's a free market system after all. But I think that some of these, large corporations, like the really big companies, they're just buying like hundreds of houses at once. I don't think that they should be allowed to do that. I think that there should be like a law or something that they can't own more than like 20% of like homes. Like, one company can't own more than like 20% of homes in a single town or something like that. Like, there should maybe make a law where the first 48 hours or like 72 hours that a house goes up, that private buyers can like buy that house. Only private buyers. Companies can't. And if the house doesn't get sold within like that 72-hour period or something like that, then companies can, buy the house. But at the start, it should be available like the first 72 hours, where it should be private buyers should be able to buy the houses. Because the problem with these companies is these companies will just snatch these houses just the first day that they come up. Sometimes even the first hour that these houses go on sale, these companies will snatch them. I've seen this happen in person. I've seen these companies do this in person, where they literally just snatch these houses up. And before I became a landlord, before I purchased some of these properties, I had no idea that this problem was going on. That this was just how bad this actually was. But this is I'm telling you, this is a really big problem with these companies, is buying so much land and just, one company basically owning like so many homes in like a single town and just basically renting it out. So where I live in the upper Midwest, right? In my town, there is actually like 2 or 3 companies that own the vast majority of the rental houses. Like, it's ridiculous that like just so many companies just own so many rental properties out here. And so like people like me are not really part of the problem, because like, people will rage against landlords, saying, oh, landlords are, destroying housing and they're preventing other people from owning homes. But the thing is, I'm a small business guy. I own 2, rental properties, and I own those just to basically make me some passive income, some extra income that I can make that, helps me out. That's it. I'm good to my tenants. I'm fair to my tenants. I haven't raised my tenants' rent ever. I've never raised my tenants' rent. I haven't, and I've had them for years. So, I'm not the people that's like taking homes away from people. I'm just a guy who owns 2 properties, and that's it. I'm not somebody that owns like, hundreds of properties. So people shouldn't be, raging at me. They should be like raging at these large companies. So, like, they are the problem. These large companies, they're basically just buying up so many houses and so much problems. And if you want to know how bad this problem is, I purchased my first rental property. I purchased that property in May of 2022, and that property, when I purchased it, it was up for a couple days. I really liked the place, and I ended up buying it. But then what happened was 2 years later passes, right? And it's like February, March of 2024. That's like right around that time. And I have enough. I want to buy another property. And this time I want to buy a property that's like closer to my apartment, because my other rental, it was 30 minutes from my apartment, 30 minutes. And like whenever I had to, go over there, if there was like a repair that was needed and I had to get, hire a handyman or something like that, it'd drive like 30 minutes. And so I wanted to like get my second rental. I wanted to be like a bit closer, so it's easier for me to, manage the property, you do things, don't have to make this long drive. And on my part of town where my apartment is, it's like the newer part of town, where it is like this mostly like, new companies that are buying up houses and like building new houses. And so like a house goes up, right? And I like the house, and I want to buy the house, and the house has only been up for like a day. It's on Zillow. I see it. I text my real estate agent. I'm like, hey, can we go and take a look at this house? And he's like, no, Pat, we can't. Like, why? He's like, the house has already been sold. Like, what? It's only been out for like 1 or 2 days. He's like, no, it's a company bought it. What? And so then what ends up happening is a couple days later, I see a nice house. I like it. And it's only been up for like a day. I'm like, hey, can we go take a look at this house? And he's like, oh, no, we can't. It's already been bought. I'm like, what? It's only been a day. A company bought it. Again, another company bought it just within a day being up. And what ends up happening is then like a couple days later, see another house. Guess what? Same thing happens. Company buys it up. And I was getting pissed at that point. I was getting annoyed because I wanted to get one more rental. But then what happens is I see this one house. And this one house, it's perfect. It's like a beautiful house. I like it. And it's only like 2 blocks away from my apartment. That's how close it is. It's literally 2 blocks from my apartment. It's so super close. And I was like, this is perfect. And what happens is I happened to find that house just 1 hour as it was up on Zillow. Like, I was just so lucky because I was just scrolling Zillow and the house only up for an hour. And I text my real estate agent. I'm like, get this house. We want to get this house. Like, let's start doing the paperwork. I want to buy it. And that was that. And I ended up getting that property. And I know it was a bit risky of me, like, starting to do that without even going to check it out. But everything turned out fine in the end. There was nothing wrong with the house and everything was good. But basically, if I didn't do that, there was another company would have basically just came in and snatched the house. And the crazy thing about that is that block where I actually purchased that rental property, that block, like the company owns most of the houses on that block. And so I was like, that one house that I bought that they couldn't get, and they were pissed about that. They were annoyed because what they would do is they would constantly keep calling me. They would call me, they would text me, telling me like, hey, we'll give you a cash offer on the house, like constantly trying to buy it from me. And I'm like, no, go away, stop. And then they keep sending me letters. They want to buy the house. It's getting like to the point where it's harassment. I block their numbers, and then they keep calling me with more and more and more different numbers. And I got so annoyed once when they called me telling me that they want to give me a cash offer for the house, and I just started trolling them. And I told them, okay, look, I'll sell you my house. And they're like, great, what is the how much do you want for the property? You know what I said to them? I said to them, I want $2 million for the house. You know how much the house was worth? The house was worth around like $400,000, and I'm like, I want $2 million. That's what I told the company. And the woman on the phone, she got mad at me. She's like, are you serious, sir? I'm like, yeah, give me $2 million if you want the property. And then she hung up, and that was it. That's how I basically pissed them off and annoyed them. But look, and I get it that what I do, not everybody can do what I can do. Like, I'm very blessed and I'm very fortunate that I was very successful on YouTube, and I did really well with that, and then I was able to invest in rental properties. But the thing is, when I purchased those houses, right, I did a lot of that in cash. And so I didn't, do, mortgages. I didn't do that stuff. But when you are a cash buyer, you have an advantage because you don't have to go through all the paperwork, and it's just way quicker. And you are basically at the top of the line. Like, most home buyers would want to, deal with somebody who's doing strictly cash. That's basically what they want to deal with. And so if it was that hard for me, to purchase a house when I was just, trying to get a rental property, I can't imagine how hard it must be in that same area trying to purchase a house for somebody that's, doing a mortgage. And so that's why I think the government should basically step in and do something about this, like the state governments, to stop these large companies from just basically buying up this land, because that's what's causing the housing crisis. That is why rents keep going up. That's why people can't find houses, and why houses end up becoming so expensive. It's too hard to produce a house. It's too hard to make a house because of the regulations. And at the same time, as you have these large companies that basically just come in and they buy hundreds of houses. And I don't think that like one company should control like thousands of homes. That's ridiculous. That is just ridiculous. Like a landlord controlling like a few homes. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I own 2 properties, and I want to get probably 2 more in the future. But when I get to 4, I'm done. I'm not getting any more. So probably 2 more in the future, but that's it. Never again. No more. But like I can't imagine like a single company, literally owning like thousands of homes. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's too much. And even though I'm a big free market guy, I do think the government should do something about that. That's stop that crap from happening. And the dangerous thing about that is it's not just American companies that are doing this. It's also companies from China. You have companies from China that are actually buying up tons of American homes, buying up American farms. Like in the Midwest, it's happening where they've been buying up like farms and stuff like that. And so this is like also a national security threat at this point. When you have like a very hostile regime towards the United States, and now you're letting this government that's basically a dictatorship come into America and just basically buy up like tons of American farmland. Like, what the hell is the government doing? Why are they allowing this to happen? So that's what I'll say about that. Is that's person asking me how I would improve capitalism. For the most part, I think that capitalism works great when the government stays out of the economy, but I do think in some aspects the government should interfere, and in the one aspect I've seen it, like I said, I've seen it firsthand with these greedy companies just trying to buy up houses and trying to constantly harassing me to get my house. I think that something should be done, that there should be some kind of state regulation. I don't think it should be federal. I think more states should do it. And the states should basically pass some kind of like law basically to stop these houses. And I'm telling you, these companies from buying the houses. And if you allow more houses to be built, and you stop these large companies from basically buying up all the houses, I think that rents will go down. And if you decrease property taxes, I think that will also bring it down, stuff like that. But that's it. Is these large companies are basically causing like just so many problems. Let me see. I just missed a bunch of comments here. Hey Pro, been following the channel since 2017. Your guides for GTA and Red Dead have helped me and my friends for years, and I appreciate you always keeping it real and helping out the community. Thank you, Joe. I thank you, man. Thanks for the super chat. I appreciate it. What's your favorite and least favorite GTA lore video? My favorite lore video, probably the one on the Dimitri one. Probably the Dimitri one. Like, why does Dimitri betray Nico? Probably that one. My least favorite one, I don't think I really have one. I generally enjoyed all of the lore videos that I made. Thank you, Emergency. I don't know if I really have a thoughts on the new Smolensk map and Hell Let Loose. I actually played it a lot. I do like it. I like what they did with artillery. I like how they made artillery tanks, but they also made artillery into a specific unit. I actually do like that. I'm a fan. Thank you, Rowan. Tax landlords? No. Look, here's what I will tell you. Taxing landlords is a terrible, terrible idea. It's really, really bad. I'm telling you, that is going to backfire really badly, because, like, a lot of people, they say, oh, the landlords are making money from the house, and so they should pay more money. But what people don't understand is that landlords already get taxed more. They do. In most states, landlords do get taxed more. So here's the thing is, if you own a house, right, you have two types of ownage on the house. You have owner occupancy, and then you have not occupied. If it's owner occupancy, that means that house is your primary residence. That's where you primary reside. And when you have a primary residence, the taxes on that are lowered. When you have a residence that is not your primary, residence, and you can only have one primary residence, that the taxes on that property increase. Property taxes increase. So landlords already pay higher property taxes on the rental properties that they own. They do. So if a landlord owns a house, and then there's another house next door, and it's basically the exact same type of house, the exact same type of square foot, the landlord is going to pay more in property taxes than the guy who's already who owns like the nearby home, and he has his primary residence. And the government is going to know if you're a landlord, even if you don't tell them, because they're going to see, oh, it's not your primary residence, what are you doing with these other houses? So it's going to be obvious to them. They're going to know that you're a landlord, so you don't even need to tell the government. And I don't even need to tell the government that I'm a landlord. I just the federal income tax, I tell them that they know that. But the government already knows, so it's not like you have to report it or anything that you're allowed. I guess it depends on the state, but the government's going to know. That, like in my state, for example, there's not really a license for being a landlord or anything like that. Like, you don't need that. So that's, I guess it just all depends on the states and how each state does it. Each state has different laws regarding it. But yeah, federal government, you just tell them, you're a landlord and stuff like that. But the states, this depending if you have state income tax, you'll tell them you have state income tax, but they'll know regardless, because it's the property tax, the owner occupancy. But basically, getting back to my point, you said to tax landlords more, and I'm telling you that would be a mistake if you increase the taxes more, because I'm telling you, a lot of landlords are greedy. I'll tell you, a lot of landlords are not nice people. And a lot of landlords, what they will do is they are just going to pass that on to the renter. That's what they're going to do. They're going to pass the taxes on to the renter. So if you just increase their property taxes, you're like, oh yeah, they're paying their fair share and stuff like that. That's what people say. But what they're going to do is they're just going to pass that on to the renter. They're just going to increase their rent. That's what they do. That's what happens in my state. In my state, the landlords pay a little bit higher in property taxes, and most of them, what they do is they basically pass that on to the tenant. That's what they do. So basically, you're just increasing the tenant's rent at that point. And also, there is a correlation between high property taxes and also high rent. Because if you look at the states that have the highest rent, the highest rent, they have something in common. The states that have the highest rent always have the highest property taxes. Don't just take my word for it, Google it. The states that have the highest rent almost always have the highest property taxes. That's basically how it is. And the reason for that, the reason it correlates with each other, is because the landlord is basically trying to make money. That's ultimately what it is. And so if the property taxes are really high, the landlord's going to make the rent really high because they're going to want to make a profit. Otherwise, there's no point, because the whole point of being a landlord is to make a profit. You're trying to make a profit off of people basically paying you, every month for living inside your property. That's what it is. So, raising the tax on landlords is not going to make the situation better. It's actually going to have the opposite effect, where they're just going to pass it on to the tenants. I haven't done that. I've never raised my tenants' rent. I haven't done that. And I actually, in one of my tenants, I made a yearly lease a couple months back, and the other one we made a 2-year lease again, and I didn't raise rent on either of them. So I don't do that stuff. And the reason I don't raise rent on them is because I don't need to do that, because I have enough money as it is, so I don't need more money. I'm not greedy. And also, the people at both my rental properties are really nice people. They're both really nice families. I don't have any problem with them. We've had a great relationship, and so like I don't want to make it harder for somebody. Increasing like rent on somebody for like an extra $100 a month, that could really be the difference between like them getting groceries. So like there's no need to do something like that. You're just gonna piss people off. You're gonna make it harder for them. So that's the way I see it. I'd rather have like a renter that I can have for like many years, doesn't cause problems. I have a great relationship, it's nice, than doing stuff like that. So a lot of the other houses in the area, they're like $100 more, $200 more than me, but I don't do that stuff, because like I said, I got nice people, and there's no reason for me to raise the rent. But most landlords are not like me. A lot of landlords, what they'll do is they'll basically say, "Oh, it's my business. The taxes are going up, so I'm gonna increase taxes on the tenants also." So, telling you it's not gonna work out. And I will tell you this: my parents' home here in New York, where my parents live, right? My parents live in Nassau County, and Nassau County, this county is the most taxed, I think, county in America. I gotta look it up if it is, but I think Nassau County is the most taxed county in America, which is just ridiculous. But anyways, about the property tax, you know what the property tax on my parents' home is? My parents' home It's 18 grand, $18,000 a year. That's what the problem. That's ridiculous. That's insane. $18,000 a year for the property tax here. And get this. My parents are not living in a mansion. You would think that my parents are living in like a palace or something like that if they're paying an $18,000 property tax. If you like live in a place like Texas and you're paying an $18,000 property tax, yeah, you're probably living in a palace. But like in New York, they're not living in some kind of palace. They are living in a middle-class home that was basically built in the 1950s. 1950s when this house was built. And here's what I'll tell you about that. Going back to it. What my parents are considering is my parents are debating on whether they should sell the house, because my parents want to move to Nevada next year, and my parents are debating on whether they want to sell the house or rent it out. Because if they sell the house, you know, they'll get a bunch of money for it. The house is worth over $1 million, and that's, like I said, it's not a mansion. It's just that the properties in New York are just insanely overpriced. That's basically what the value of the property is. So they could get the $1 million, or they could rent it out. And the renting it out, they would get money over time. But here's the thing. I actually looked up what the rent on my parents' property would be, and I looked up what the rents in the nearby neighborhood is. And if we were basically to rent out this house, the average rent, it would be like $5,000, close to $6,000. And the reason for that is because the property taxes are over $18,000. That's what it is. So that's the really high property taxes. That's basically the main reason. And those $18,000 property taxes, they would probably increase even more. So when we rent out the property, those would go up. Probably go up over 20 grand at this point. And so, like I said, that is one of the reasons the rent is actually really high, because the property taxes are just so insanely high. And so, like, think about this. Let's just say the property taxes, instead of being $18,000, let's just say that they were $6,000 a year instead of $18,000, right? Just, you know, cut them down by, you know, to a third. If you did something like that, I could basically, you know, rent out the property, and I could rent it out for, you know, what, $2,500 a month, maybe $3,000 a month, half of what, you know, a house like this would rent out for, you know, in the town, in the neighborhood. And what would happen is other landlords would see that, and they would have to basically lower their price to compete, because nobody is going to want to live in a pay, you know, $5,000-$6,000 rent when there's other houses that are basically renting out that are similar structure, similar square foot for like, you know, $2,000 or $3,000 cheaper. So that's what I'll say, is that they would have to basically lower their prices to compete. So that's one of the things, is you lower property taxes, and I think that would also decrease rents. It would have a huge effect. So, but increasing taxes on landlords, and I get it, there's greedy landlords or scumbag landlords, I get that. But I'm telling you, increasing taxes on them is not going to help. It's going to make it worse, because all they're going to do is they're going to increase the rent on their tenants to basically make up the difference. Let me see here. Is it true that swatters use VPNs from China to avoid getting detected by the cops? Also, thoughts on people using fireworks in bathrooms. My neighbor got suspended doing it in school. What? That's stupid. But I don't know about, you know, anything else swatters using, you know, Chinese VPNs. I know they use VPNs a lot of times to hide their you know, their IP and stuff like that. But I will tell you something. The way that I see it, if somebody engages in swatting, right? If somebody does that, I think that should basically be attempted murder. I think that's what that should be. I think it should be an attempted murder charge. And the reason I feel this way is because you are sending a heavily, you know, armed team to somebody's house. Like the swatters, they're doing that. They're sending like a heavily armed police team to somebody's house, and what they do to basically get the SWAT team to go to people's houses is they'll make up some crap. They'll say, oh, the person's got a bomb, or they have hostages or something like that, or they're gonna do a mass shooting, stuff like that. And the police, they don't take chances on stuff like that. When they get a call like that, they're gonna basically just rush in, you know, be all prepared, and in that confusion, somebody could get seriously injured, or they could be killed. That actually happened to a guy, I think it was in Kentucky, where there was these two idiots that were on Call of Duty like a number of years ago, and what ended up happening is they were arguing over some dumb crap, and one of the guys basically was threatening to SWAT another guy, and another guy basically was like, oh yeah, send him to my house, here's my address. But the address that he gave him wasn't even his address. It was just basically some random person's address that he found online, and then the other idiot basically, thinking that was his address, sent the SWAT team to his, house, saying the guy's like dangerous, got a gun or whatever it was that he said. And the SWAT team come to the guy's house, and there's a video of it. There's like a body cam video of it. It's really brutal. But the police are giving the guy confusing instructions. They're like, one cop is like telling him, stay where you are. Another cop is like telling him, come towards us. And he's coming towards them, and they just basically opened fire on him and killed him. And so the cops, unfortunately, in that situation were also declared not guilty. I think the cops were guilty in that situation because they were giving him conflicting instructions. One cop was saying, come towards us. Another cop was saying, stay where you are. People don't know what the hell they're supposed to do when they have, people staring, screaming at them, pointing guns at them like that in those situations. But the guy involved in that actually ended up getting caught. He ended up getting, sentenced. I think this was Kentucky where it happened. And that same guy had called in, SWAT teams to schools before. The guy was, a real piece of crap. But that was, like, I think that was the first case of, like, somebody actually dying from, like, swatting, something like that actually happening. So, like, and, like, people that do stuff like this, I do think the charge should be attempted murder. And if somebody actually does die, I think it should be murder. That's what I think it should be. Because, like, they are sending, like, a heavily armed police team to somebody's house, and that could very well result in their deaths. That's what that is. Thank you, Exquisite Vibes, for the super chat. That's Altor activities, yeah. Well, what I was talking, like, and the thing is that, like, when we're talking about Altor in Saints Row 2, here's the thing about Altor. Altor is actually a parody of those companies that I was actually telling you guys about. There are companies out there that are just like Altor. Like, companies, like, they don't have, like, this crazy militarized police that Altor has, but they are very wealthy, they're very powerful, and they do, scummy things like what Altor did to, like, Saints Row, for example. And what I'll say about that with Saints Row 2, like, people think that Altor are the good guys. Altor are not the good guys. Altor are a very evil and greedy company in Saints Row 2, because what happens is they look at, like, Saints Row. The Saints Row is basically the hood in Saints Row 1, and then in Saints Row 2, it's like this really nice place of, like, parks and, like, and bridges and like this water canal that goes through the area. Everything's been renovated, like high-rise condos, and people think, like, oh, it was a success. It was, it's a great place now and stuff like that. But here's the thing about that. While Altor might have made Saints Row look nice, and they might have gotten rid of the crime problem, here's the thing. It's not a success. And the reason it's not a success is because all the people that lived in Saints Row, all the poor people that lived in that area, all of those poor people, those aren't the same people that are living in Saints Row. All of the people that are living in Saints Row 2, in Saints Row, in that neighborhood, they're all not from that area. So they're basically all, like, middle class and, like, upper and lower end rich people that basically just moved into the area. And so stuff like this happens where, like, these large companies will go into, like, an area like poor area like the hood, and what they'll do is they'll basically buy up all the properties. And what they do is they raise the rent really high in these properties. They wait till the leases expire. When the leases expire, they raise the rent really high. And the reason they raise the rent really high is because they know that people are going to move out. People aren't going to be able to afford it. And that's ultimately what their goal is. Their goal is to basically just push all the people out of the neighborhood, all the lower, class people out of the neighborhood. And then what they do is they tear down all the old buildings, and then they build it with, like, condos and stuff like that. And then they just rent it to, like, middle class people. All the poor people that have been living in the area basically get pushed out. And that's what Devin was doing. Devin Weston in GTA 5, that's also what he was doing. He was doing that. He was, like, basically pushing a lot of people out of their neighborhoods and just building up these condos. That's what he was actually going to do to, he was going to do that to, the film studio. That's what he was going to do. He's going to build a bunch of condos there. And the thing about this is these companies, a lot of times, they get tax breaks and a lot of times tax bonuses and stuff like that, because they'll say to the government, oh, we're providing housing. And the government will basically look the other way for a lot of this stuff happening. So that is a massive problem. It's called gentrification. That's ultimately what it is, a gentrification. So the only way it would be a success is if the same people lived in the area. But, like, what you're basically doing is you're just displacing poor people, because you're just moving the poor people from one area to another. That's it. The poor people aren't going to stop being poor. They're just moving from one area to another. So you're not really fixing the problem. All you're basically doing is you're just displacing a bunch of poor people from their homes and just destroying their neighborhoods and building a bunch of condos for middle class and upper, lower end rich people, and then the poor people just go to move to another neighborhood, and then the cycle repeats. So it's not really a success. That's what I would put about it. But yeah, companies like Old Tour, exist, and they do crap like this. It's a massive massive problem. Uh, Now that Black Ops 7 is done, you gotta play Ride to Hell Retribution and see which game is truly the worst game you ever played. I am actually gonna play Ride to Hell Retribution. Ride to Hell Retribution, I think, would make me absolutely go insane. I think I would go insane playing that game. It is just that game was just so terrible. Thank you, Eternus, for the super chat. Hey, Pro, what do you think of Michael and Amanda's marriage 12 years later? Amanda was so chipper in the mansion cutscene. Michael was always my favorite. I'm actually happy that they've at least stayed married and their marriage has actually been stable. And when Amanda and Michael were interacting, it was actually kind of like good. Like they kind of had a good relationship. Where it was more Michael was just more annoyed with her a little bit with like being obsessed with the furniture, but there wasn't like really anything toxic about that. So their marriage did remain stable. No, I'm gonna watch the new season of Tulsa King this month.
Sales open. The county thanks you for your service.
Taxes are bad and must only be used when absolutely necessary, like for courts and military. Yeah, and the problem is the government just spends money on just so much dumb crap. Oh, it is, Adrian. What do they say about it? Nepal, yeah, I would say it is kind of a socialist country. It was controlled by a socialist political party for a very long time. Yes, Mr. Faber will be the villain. I'm actually gonna have a lore video talking about him, Minion Dave. Give landlords less power. Tax landlords on how much they can increase rental prices. Give tenants cheaper rates and make more social housing and subsidize rental prices. Let the government take control. No, I don't think that is the I don't think that is the solution. Look, like I said, if you remove or lower property taxes entirely, you can actually decrease rent. Because I'm telling you, landlords like me would come in and I would have the rent very low if property taxes were very low as well. So that's what I'll say about that. Have the rent very low, and you will have a lot of landlords that will be making like they'll be making properties that are for people to rent out that are much more affordable. And look, here's what I'll tell you about this is landlords also do provide a service. People think that they take away housing from people, but sometimes people move to an area and they don't plan on being long in that area. Like they might live in the area for like 1 or 2 years, maybe like on business, and then they're gonna move after like a year or two. And so, what would be the solution in that situation? Would it be better to buy a house? Like, for a year or two? That's stupid. It would be the economically better thing would be to rent. And a lot of times, renting will help you save money. Because you can put that towards, like, other properties. And so, like, not everybody just wants to flat out, buy a property. Sheriff Gray always is drunk, yeah. A lot of landlords will just pocket the difference. Maybe at first, Improv Snow, but what I'm telling you is when other landlords start charging very much less than the other ones because of the property taxes, what's going to happen is that they're going to have to bring down the prices. They will. You think Claude went to Carcer City after GTA 3? Who knows what happened to him? I'm, and the thing about it is that most of the GTA characters, we at least know kind of what happened to them. Like, CJ became, was running a casino and became a manager for Mad Dog. Tommy Vercetti, took over a criminal empire. Vic Vance unfortunately died. Tony Cipriani takes over the Leone family. But, like, when it comes to Claude, we don't know what happened to him. There's no lore. We don't know what happened to him. Thank you, Ghost Studio, for the super chat. Thanks, man. I missed more... Oh. Speaking of properties, I'm torn between the Richmond and the Vinewood Mansion in the new GTA update. Which one should I go for? Well, you can get the Tongva one. The Tongva one I think is even cheaper, but I like the Tongva one personally because the view. I just like the view because it's not near the city, not near any other houses. That's the one I like, Joe. New Jersey is horrible with property taxes. Yeah, it is, Shadow Narwhal. It's also really bad. Why is education so good in countries that have tax and are socialist? And well, I don't know what you mean. What countries are socialist? What are you talking about? Are you talking about China? Uh, will I play the BioShock series? Yes, I'll play that on the channel one day. I actually really like the BioShock series. Hang on, I'm gonna... in here. Okay, got him. Finland and Denmark have taxes and they're socialist, and look at their living conditions, professional. I don't know if you were here 30 minutes ago, dude, but I actually explained this earlier. Finland and Denmark are not socialist countries. They are not. If you actually ask the Finnish government and if you ask the Finnish government and the Danish government, are you socialist? They'll say hell no. So those countries are not socialist. They have a very generous social, safety net and social programs. They have definitely that. But those countries are not, those countries are not socialist at all. They're not. And also, Finland actually spent a huge portion of its history actually fighting against socialists that were constantly invading their country. So that's what I'll say about that. But look, one of the reasons that Finland is actually very successful in, thank God my country has no taxes. Yeah, you're talking about Saudi Arabia. In your country in Saudi Arabia has no income tax, I believe. There's no income tax. I actually really like that people actually get to keep all of their money. That is, people, because if you got rid of income tax, people would basically have everybody has 30% more in their pocket. People could use that towards mortgages, helping to pay off homes. People always say, tax the rich, for example, will fix everything. But if you just decrease taxes on everybody, that'll actually put way more money in people's pockets. But look, what I'll say about Finland, Finland is, yeah, I know you're not from Saudi Arabia, but you live there, Spreezo. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But look, here's what I'll say about that. Finland's education is very successful. And it is. I will concede that Finland has some of the highest, test scores, but also on top of that, they have, their students are generally happy. But the reason that is, it's not any socialist policies or anything like that. It's because in Finland, I think that kids only go to school 4 days a week. And because they only go to school 4 days a week, kids are just more happy, they have more free time, they're just more productive. That's the primary motivator, primary driving factor. But look, here's what I'll tell you guys something, is when it comes to education, right, just because one country, right, has higher test scores, does not mean that that country is smarter than another country. So, when it comes to, my country, America, the United States, right, what a lot of people will do is a lot of people will say, oh, China, India, South Korea, Japan have higher test scores. That's what they'll say. But just because, China, India, South Korea, and Japan have higher test scores does not mean that their education system is better. It doesn't even mean that people are smarter in those countries. But here's what I'll say about this. These test scores don't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me if, China, for example, has, higher test scores than America. And the reason I'll say that these don't matter is because what I think the most important thing for education, it's not the test scores is the most important thing. What I think the most important thing is the morale of the students. It's how the students feel. Because let's take away the people who defend China's high test scores and Japan's high test scores and India's high test scores. The people who defend those, do you know what they constantly leave out? Do you know what they leave out of that? what they leave out is they leave out the mental state of those kids. Now let me ask the chat here, guys. Do you think that the average American student is more mentally happy? Or do you think the average Indian and Chinese and Japanese student is more mentally happy? We're not talking about test scores. We're talking mental happiness. Like, you're not having all of these mental issues, just being generally happy, being stable, not, feeling like you're being overworked, stuff like that. And you can just look at that, and I know what most people are thinking in here. Most people are thinking that it's the Americans that are, more mentally happy, and they are. So that's it. So that's what people don't look at. They don't look at the high. They look at the high test scores. They're like, oh, Japan has higher test scores than America, and they'll say that means the Japanese students are better than American students. But then take a look at American and Japanese students. Compare their mental health, because I guarantee you the Japanese students have way more mental health problems than the American students do. And the reason that these countries, like in India, South Korea, China, the reason in Japan, the reason that these countries have that the students in these countries are like so miserable. The reason for that is because in these countries, and part of it is also the culture. In these countries, like, the culture pushes the students very hard, and they basically say, study, 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 study. That's it. And the kids in these Asian countries, they basically feel like they have no break. They feel like they have no freedom. They feel like they basically can't be kids. That's basically what it is. They don't feel like they have that freedom at all whatsoever. And like, one of the best things about being a kid, is enjoying your childhood. And if your entire childhood, you're not allowed to have any kind of fun, and all basically is your parents just constantly tell you, study, 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 study. That's it. You're not able to hang out with friends. You're not able to watch movies. You're not able to, play video games. You're not able to do any kid stuff that basically has fun. Instead, all you're basically doing is you're just constantly studying. Meanwhile, your childhood batch passes basically just like that. So that's what I'll say, is that America might not have the highest test scores in the world, but kids have way more freedom in America. And kids are not basically experiencing this crap that you have like kids in like a lot of these Asian countries, South Korea, like I said, Japan, China, India. And the thing is, in like some of these countries, it's like really bad, because in countries like India and China, a lot of the families there, they are way more strict than like American families come to education. And I'll give you guys like a perfect example. Like in some of these countries, like in India or China, if a kid, for example, does not get like a perfect score in a test, if they don't get like an A+, like just 100%, their families basically be like, if you don't get 100 on this test, you are not my son anymore. You are not my daughter. You are basically banished from this family. Like, I don't want to see you. And the parents basically treat their kids like this absolute crap. Now, in America, if a kid is, doing bad at their classes, the parents are going to be pissed, obviously. They're going to ground the kids, but they're not going to like tell the kids, you're banished, you're not my son anymore. That doesn't really happen for the most part. But in some of these Asian countries, some of these cultures, they're just really strict with this stuff, and it really destroys these kids' mental health. And that's what I'll say about that. Like, one of my friends in India, he was telling me these horror stories about how, like, in India, there's like in India every single day, like, I don't remember what the number he said, it was like 10 students or something like that kill themselves in India. So I gotta look up what the stat was, but he was telling me how, like, there's a specific stat in India that, like, every day, like, a certain number of students kill themselves. And in these countries, students study 6 days a week. 6 days a week. And not only do they study 6 days a week, so they go to school on Saturdays, they also go to school way longer than Americans. They're in school for much longer than Americans. And so they're trapped in these long hours of school. They're wearing uniforms also. When kids wear uniforms, they're more miserable. They are. Because they don't have freedom. They feel like basically they're controlled by the school. So they're in these tightly controlled schools with these school uniforms. They're treated like crap. Their parents are basically constantly tiger parenting them, telling them, study, 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 study. They feel like they have no freedom. They can't be kids. They can't have any enjoyment whatsoever. And that's why the suicide rate is basically so high in these Asian countries. That's why. The suicide rate in these Asian countries for students is so high, because the students are basically pushed to their breaking point, and they feel like they basically have no freedom. They feel like they have no escape. That is ultimately why the suicide rate is so high in these countries. So at the end of the day, people can say, oh, China and Japan have higher test scores, but do I want America to be more like China and Japan? Hell no. No, I don't. And that's what I will tell you, is that the high test scores mean nothing. They mean nothing if your kids are miserable. If kids are miserable and they're basically programmed to be like robots, you treat them like robots and not like kids, they're gonna be miserable. And I don't want crap like that happening. So that's what I'll say. Public schools in America can't even feed their students. Yeah, and I will agree with you there. That I do agree with you there, Pones, is that if you go to a public school, I think the school should provide meals to the kids. That I do agree with you on that. That I do think that's stupid. So that we are in agreement on. But here's what I'll tell you about America is the beautiful thing about America is that in America you have the freedom of choice. Is that you can basically, if you want your kids to go to public school, you can send them to public school. If you want to send them to a religious private school, you can do that. If you want to send them to a private school that's not religious, you can do that. If you want to homeschool your kids, you can do that. In most of these countries, you can't do that. In most of those countries, you can't homeschool your kids. The government won't let you. They say, no, you are not going to homeschool your kids. They won't let you do that. In America, you have the freedom to do that. So, and this is what foreigners don't understand about Americans all the time, because foreigners will, like, say, for example, oh, my country has higher test scores and stuff like that. But Americans, they don't really care about stuff like that. Americans, they value more of the individual, not the collective, and they care more about freedom, the freedom of choice, the freedom to choose my destiny, the freedom to choose how I get educated, stuff like that. That's what ultimately, Americans, care about primarily, not these, really high test scores. So the parents want them to have a better life than they had. So that's the reason. And the Saturday school, again, is false. Many schools have the 5-day week. Many Indian families are very nice and lenient. I'm not talking only about India. I was talking about, like, India, China, Japan, South Korea. Like, some of these, countries have, like, 5 days, in school. And, they had the kids are longer in school. They're forced to wear uniforms. They're much more stricter in schools. They're not as chill as, like, American schools. Do you think that Michael would have killed Franklin if he was successfully pulled back up by Franklin ending B? Is Franklin changing his mind enough? I don't really know on that one. I think that I think that was, like, when Michael, like, when Michael headbutts Franklin, when he basically, like, pulls him up, Michael was basically, that was pretty much suicide at that point. That's what that was, is Michael was killing himself, because he, I guess Michael had kind of, like, given up, because, like, Franklin was, like, one of the few people that he could trust, and Franklin had basically just betrayed him, and so that was pretty much what that was. So I don't think Michael was gonna get pulled up by Franklin. I think he was just gonna always kill himself, so that's ultimately what that was. Stereotype is that Indian families are strict, and again, a stereotype is that Chinese families are strict. Many American families are also strict. There are definitely American families that are strict. I do not I'm not debating that. But what I'm saying is, if you compare, like, America and China, for example, Chinese parents on average are much more strict than American parents are. And like I said, it's I know that not every single, family in, like, India or China is like this. I fully understand that. But I'm saying is that there is a difference between the two countries. Largely, there is a difference between that. And so, like, I have friends that live in India. I have friends that I've talked to specifically about India. I don't know anybody that lives in China, but I know people that live in India. And I've talked to people in India, and they've actually told me this exact stuff about this stuff. That this is a massive problem. You have very high, and look, you have very high suicide rates for students in these countries. There's a reason for that happening. Kids are not basically allowed to be kids, and they're constantly basically pushed to their breaking point. Can we find this other guy here? Okay. Socialism boosts economic equality, social welfare, collective decision-making, and social justice, as well as giving people more opportunity to learn. It's only the stuff that the government wants you to learn. That's what socialism is. They will tightly control exactly what they want you to learn. They'll basically turn the entire population to robots. That is essentially what they will do. Socialist countries just have no incentive. They don't. Like, there's no incentive to work hard or be productive, because you're not getting rewarded for that. You're not getting paid for it. People do stuff because they want to get paid for it. Cyberpunk, yeah, I'd do it one day. Let me see if I can find this bounty target. He's going to be up here. The reason that some Indian families are strict about studies is that because many Indian parents grew up in socialist India, where there was opportunities only if you had education, so that's why. Well, the thing is that it's not. I would agree with you on that, but here's the thing: is in those countries, in like China and India, right? They constantly push their kids to go to these fancy schools, like to be like in India, for example. It's that there's a common thing in India where so many parents basically push their kids to be doctors, where they don't even want to be doctors. That's why so many Indians are doctors. Like if you notice in like a lot of foreign doctors in America, specifically Indians, because there is just like a culture in India where they push their kids specifically to be doctors because they think that that's like the highest standing there. That's like the best career that their kids could have. But what I'll say about this is oh, I finally found the target here. Let's get this guy up here. Tie him up. In countries like India and China, right? If you are like a high school kid, right? And you basically tell your parents, it's like, mom, dad, I don't want to be a doctor, I want to be a plumber, stuff like that. If you say stuff like that, that is considered absolutely unacceptable. Like that will parents think that that's like shame or something like that. Like they think that like college educated jobs have like the highest prestige and the most amount of honor. And they basically think that like any kind of these manual jobs that they're like inferior or there's something like inherently wrong with them. That's what they think. And so like that's that like You cocksucking piece of shit. Yeah, you were absolutely true with that, Pro. I hate to say it. Yeah. And the thing is that some of these people are like so toxic that even if you are a plumber and you're a millionaire, you run your own plumbing business, they will basically see that as inferior to being like a doctor or anything like that, even if you're making more money than a doctor, just because it's not a doctor job. So that's
Less gruesome business bringing them in alive. This part, at least. How are them coins
capitalist
look for you?
country is worse than socialist because America is a capitalist country, but look at their defense budget professional. Is that fair to the Americans who rely off of tips? Look, I will, there are a number of problems with America. I never said that America is this perfect place with no problems. And yes, I do agree with you. I agree. The United States spends way too much money on its military budget. I do agree with you on that. I think that that's ridiculous. I think we should have a military, but, the amount that we spend on it, I think, can be a bit too high. But that doesn't mean that like capitalism is like bad just because America overspends the military or something like that. That's not really an argument. That's that. And also I will tell you something. If you actually look at communist countries historically are actually the countries that actually spend the most amount of their GDP on the military. They do. They actually spend the highest percentage on the military, much more than capitalist countries do. Like for example, what was it? America, I think, spends like 4 or 5% of its GDP, so all of the money in the country in the military, and that's actually very high, where most countries spend between 1-2%. So like America spends like double of their GDP more than most other countries do on the military. But if you look at a country like North Korea, do you know how much of North Korea's GDP they actually spend on the military? North Korea's GDP is like 25 to 30% of the GDP. And for people that don't know what GDP is all of the money in the country. So just think about that. All of the money in North Korea, all of the money, between 25 to 30% of that goes to the military. That is basically it. So, communist countries have a history of actually overspending insanely high on the military. They do. So, a lot of communist countries, they spend a lot on the military. And do you know why communist countries spend so much on the military? Because it's to keep their government in power. That's why. It's to keep their rule in power. That's not to protect themselves from foreigners. It's basically protect themselves from their own people. That's why they basically spend so much, money on the militaries in those countries. GTA Vice City Stories 20th anniversary next year. Oh yeah, we'll do a playthrough of it, Shadow Narwhal. Yeah, we'll do a playthrough of it. Yeah, and I agree with you there, General. If I got paid, like if everybody got paid the exact same, there would basically be no incentive to work hard. There would be no incentive to actually do anything productive. Thoughts on the Marshall Plan, professional? America did the Marshall Plan, but never gave that money to their own people, only to Europe to prevent socialism. Well,
what you did for me, you know?
Look, hang on. About the Marshall Plan. About that, right? The Marshall Plan was genius. It was one of like America's best, policy decisions ever. Because what the Marshall Plan did was the Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe. It was President Truman who did that. So and here's the thing about the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan wasn't just aid. Like people think that it was just aid, but the Marshall Plan came with strings attached. And the strings were that the country had to be a democracy. It had to be a republic. So it was. It could not be like a dictatorship. It could not be an authoritarian country. On top of that, another one of the strings attached was that they actually had to open up their markets to the American market. So America could do business with those countries. So it helped American markets because Americans would do business with a lot of those countries, and it would also help their economies. And it rebuilt Europe. Because Europe was bankrupt after World War II. It rebuilt Europe and prevented them from being taken over by communists. Because if America did not do that, there was actually a huge possibility that communists would have come to power, because the communists were just saying all about housing, free healthcare and stuff, and people had their homes blown up by the Nazis, and so people were desperate and willing basically to turn to anything. And so there's a real, possibility that communism could have taken over. But here's the thing about this. The Marshall Plan, and a lot of people don't know this, the US actually offered the Marshall Plan to communist countries. It did. It was not, people think that, the United States just gave it to the Western Europe and forgot about Eastern Europe. That's not true. The United States actually did want to give Eastern Europe the aid, including the Soviet Union. So the U.S. actually offered the Marshall Plan to the Soviets as well. It offered it to communist Poland. It offered it to communist East Germany. It offered it to Hungary, Czechoslovakia. But here's the thing is, not one communist country actually took aid from the Marshall Plan. Do you know why? Because Stalin forbid it. Stalin basically said, no, they're not going to take any of that. And basically, Stalin was basically saying, they would turn into American puppets. That's what Stalin was basically saying about that. But here's the thing. All of those countries were actually puppets of Stalin. They were puppets of the Soviet Union. And here's the thing. The Soviets didn't even give those countries aid. And you know what the Soviets did? They instead took factories from those countries. So what the Soviets would do is the Soviets would go into countries and they would take apart the entire factory, like everything. They would disassemble the entire factory and they would just ship it back to the Soviet Union. And they didn't just do this in Eastern Europe. They did this in China as well. When the Soviets invaded Manchuria in August of 1945, they actually took apart all of the factories in Manchuria, because Manchuria had a lot of factories, and they took apart all these factories and they just shipped all the parts back to the Soviet Union. So what they did was they looted the Manchuria. And the thing is that's colonialism. That's imperialism. That's what that is. And a lot of these communist countries, they're the first ones that constantly say imperialism, looting. But is that not imperialism? When you come into another country by force and you basically steal their resources and you send it back to your country, how is that not imperialism, what the Soviets did, just looting other countries and basically just stealing their factories? And the Soviets did this to Czechoslovakia. They took apart a lot of Czechoslovakian factories. And when the Soviets did this to German factories, they basically said, the Germans attacked us. But what about Czechoslovakia? Czechoslovakia didn't attack the Soviet Union. They didn't do that. Czechoslovakia was occupied by the Nazis. And so that is just so they took apart factories, and these communist governments that were puppets, they basically sat by while they let the Soviets basically just take apart all of the factories in their countries. And so the Soviets didn't give those countries any kind of aid. They were blown up, and the thing is, Eastern Europe was way more destroyed than Western Europe was during World War II. Like, Poland was completely blown up. Like that country was just the most destroyed country in World War II. So Poland was completely blown up, and Poland got looted by the Soviets as well after the war. And so that's one of the reasons that Eastern Europe is much more poor than Western Europe to this day, because of that. Because it never received the Marshall Plan aid, and it was also because the Soviets just looted those countries after the war. So the Marshall Plan was actually a good thing, because it made those countries more pro-US. It made those countries friendly to the US. It rebuilt their economies, rebuilt their industry, opened up their markets to American markets. It was just a win-win for everyone. Everyone benefited from it. Where the Soviets basically just looted those countries, turned those countries into dictatorships. Nobody benefited from that. So that was that's ultimately that. The Marshall Plan was not some imperialist thing. It had measures to it, sure, but at the end of the day, is the United States helped them out with it, with a lot of those countries. Hey Pat, long-time fan, first-time commenter. I get super anxious behind the mic when recording, but I want to keep making videos. Do you have any advice? Hey dude. What I will say is that, I'll say this, and I hope this helps you out. Me personally, in real life, if you ever met me in real life, right? You would be very surprised interacting with me, because I'm not a different person in real life, but I'm a very shy person in real life. So that's how it is. Is like I interacting with people in real life, it's just not my thing. Like I'm just a shy person. I don't typically like talking to people. I get nervous talking to people. That's just how I am. But when it comes to YouTube, it's completely different. YouTube, it's just I feel safe. I can talk to people, and I guess one of the reasons that I can talk to people on YouTube, like I have like what hundreds of people watching. What like how many people do I have watching like right now like live? But I gotta check that here. Where is it here? Right now, what we have close to 500 viewers watching live. So look, I have 500 people, almost 500 people watching me right now, but I'm not nervous. And I guess one of the reasons I'm not nervous is because I don't see everybody staring at me. I see comments. I know people are watching me through their screens, but I guess I just don't see people staring at me. But if you ask me to speak to 500 people on a stage, I could not do that. I couldn't. I would just be too nervous doing something like that. So I think that playing online, like doing these streams and like talking to your viewers, I think you're gonna find much more self-confidence in that than doing it in public, because that's at least how I see it. I hope that advice helped you. Do I think that NATO and Europe rips America off? What I'll say about that is it depends. It depends on specifically what countries. Because, for example, if you look at it, it's like people say that Europe steals from America and Europe like scams America, and the reason that people say that is because the vast majority of the NATO budget is actually covered by the United States. So like the United States covers the vast majority of the NATO budget, and there is a general agreement in NATO, and the agreement, I think it was like by 2027 or 2028, that like every single NATO member had to pay like 2% of their GDP, their gross domestic product, to the NATO budget. But here's the thing about this. There was actually several NATO countries that did not pay that amount. They actually paid under the 2% GDP, and NATO never punished those countries. NATO never told those countries, oh, you can't do stuff like this. And to be fair, it's also partially America's fault, because America hasn't really said much about it. America basically just let it slide and hasn't really criticized a lot of these governments for that. So like what America has done in response is America has actually increased its own defense spending, basically to match these other countries that weren't paying that, and that's not fair also to the American taxpayer. The American taxpayer, that they're basically paying for these European militaries. That's not fair. And so America pays like around 4% of its GDP. I think it was like 4% of its GDP to the military. And so that is not fair, that like America's spending double, what it's required to spend basically to make up for some of these countries. And like the countries that are spending the least amount on the NATO budget are countries like Spain. You have Spain. I think that France meets the NATO demands. Britain also does. Germany doesn't. It was like Greece. I don't remember Greece did. Romania did. Romania does meet the budget. Poland beats it. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania meets it, but like the countries that are the closest to Russia are the countries that are typically going to pay the highest percentage, because they understand, they've been neighbors of Russia, they've dealt with Russian aggression in the past, and so they are the most, scared about that. It's understandable. But like you will have some other, Western European countries that won't pay, and they basically expect like America, for example, to pay for that stuff. And it's like I said, it's not necessarily fair to the American taxpayer that the United States is required to do that. And that's also one of the reasons that a lot of these European countries, one of the reasons that they're actually able to pay for these huge social safety nets like universal healthcare, universal education, is because they don't spend so much on their military. Instead, it's the United States that's contributing a lot to the NATO budget. But the thing about this is, if I was president, right? What I would basically do to get all of those countries to basically meet their NATO demands, like the correct, paying the exact correct amount, I wouldn't force them to actually pay higher. You know what I would do? I would pay the exact same amount that they're paying. What I would do is I would basically be like, Spain pays like a 1%, right? What I would basically be like is I would be like, okay, if Spain wants to pay 1%, then we'll pay 1% too. That's what I would do. And if any other country complained, I'd be like, well, you guys weren't complaining when Spain was paying only 1%. So like if America basically just cut its military spending and paid the exact same amount that these European countries are, I guarantee you a lot of these European governments would actually start complaining about it. They would start complaining that America's cutting their, budget, when literally is they're not even, paying the exact same amount also. So that's ultimately, my opinion is what I would do is I would basically match it to those other countries, and I would say, if you're not going to pay, then we're not going to pay. That's how I would do. So I won't necessarily force them to pay more. I'll basically say that. But I know it wouldn't be fair to other countries who are paying their budget, like Poland and Romania and Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. But at the same time, there are countries who, were not, paying the agreed amount, and it was not fair to the American taxpayer. And I know some Europeans, they get really mad when you bring this stuff up. But if you just Google it, you just look up exactly how much like the United States is paying, and you compare it to some of these other countries like Spain, which pays so little in like the NATO budget. It's Americans basically have a right to be pissed about that. You think about that, you're like, why are we spending so much in military, and these other countries they make an agreement and they're not spending the amount that they agreed to. So that's what I'll say about that. Thank you, Josh, for the super chat. I hope I answered your question there. Let me see here. Thank you, Appalachian, for the super chat. What do you think about the lack of new clothing, tattoos, and hairstyles in the new GTA DLC? I wish we would have gotten new clothing and slots. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that we should have gotten, much... If it's gonna be like a mansion DLC, we got a barber, right? Barber, a salon. We should have had more stuff, to customize our characters with. And, the thing is, I don't understand why do they not have, like, a long hair option for, like, the characters in GTA Online? Like, I know there's, like, the surfer hair and there's, like, the other, wavy hair, but, like, when I say, like, long hair, like, I'm talking about, like for example, like, in, like, Yakuza, like, the hair that, like, Nishiki has in, like, Yakuza, like, the long, like, hair like that. Like, why can you not have hair like that on your character? Because I would like to have, like, long hair on my character, so I don't know why you can't have stuff like that. Like, in GTA 4, when you played, like, the Lost and Damned, your biker character could actually have, like, long hair. And I don't know, like, why they don't have that in GTA Online. And I think even the female haircuts, I don't think even the female haircuts have, like, really long hair either. So I think that there is a lack of customization options there. Thank you, Appalachian, for that super chat. Do I know who Kadyrov is? Kadyrov is the leader of Chechnya. Yes. Germany does. They've ramped up spending recently. Yes, I know that Germany is actually ramping up its spending recently. But the point that I'm getting at is that a lot of these countries, they did not meet their NATO demands. They've done so that they've agreed to in the past. And like I said, if you just don't look at it from a European perspective, just push that all aside. Look at it from an American perspective. Like, how would you feel if your country is like paying the majority of like the NATO budget? The agreement says you have to pay 2% of your GDP, and there are several NATO countries that are not paying that. The Americans have a right to be pissed about that. Like, they have a right to be annoyed about stuff like that. So yes, does America overspend on its military? Sure, I'll agree with you on that. But at the same time, I would say it's not fair to like the Americans taxpayer that like they're basically paying to match the budget of like other countries. And also, Germany, what they're doing is Germany's actually being really stupid about it. They're being really stupid about their military. And the reason they're being really dumb about their military is because Germany, what they're doing is they're considering conscription. And I think that's a really bad mistake. I think that's really stupid. Germany can increase their military spending without doing conscription, but they want to do conscription. They want to bring that back. I've seen a few articles and videos talking about that recently. And what Germany is like saying, they're saying it's voluntary conscription, which, what the hell is voluntary conscription? Because conscription by default, what that means drafting the civilian population. There's no such thing as voluntary conscription. But that's what Germany is saying, it's voluntary conscription. And Germany is also saying that if we don't hit our demands, that we are going to make this mandatory. And like, who are you going to draft exactly? Because I'm telling you, drafting soldiers is never going to work. It is a disaster. Because the thing is, when you have a military, right? You want soldiers in that military that want to be there. You don't want people that don't want to be there. And like having soldiers in a military that don't want to be there, I'm telling you, is going to be a disaster. And I think Germany's making a really stupid mistake with that conscription crap that they're doing recently. I think it's gonna backfire recently. And also the only countries where conscription works, conscription only works in countries that have a history of conscription. So if they have a history of conscription, they've been doing it for a very long time, it works in those countries because at least the culture and the people are like used to it. Like for example, in Switzerland has had it for a long time and they're used to it. But like a country like Germany trying to do that, I think that could backfire really badly, and I think a lot of people are gonna get mad about that. And a lot of people actually will. There's a lot of people that are probably actually going to literally go to prison like instead of getting conscripted. I guarantee you a lot of people would do that. Pro, any advice to pass a driver's test? If to passing a driver's test, you've already probably had experience driving before. Just pretend like you've been driving with your previous instructor or your father or whoever taught you. Just, don't be nervous. Being nervous is one of the worst things that you can do. Okay, let's see here. Wait, what happened? Did we get the target? I thought we got the target for a second. Wait, what? Professional, do you think that Poland should have Kaliningrad? No. When you say Kaliningrad, you're talking about that region that's like on the top right of Poland, that's part of Russia. No, I think Russia should keep it. The reason I'm saying that is because Poland could make technically like a historical claim to it, but this would be going back like, 500 years, 500, 600 years. But it makes no sense to like, give it back to Poland, and like the majority of people that live there are Russians, and it would be stupid. And the thing is, the Russians don't really have much of a claim to it either, because the Russians only annexed it after World War II. But at the same time, as the majority of people that live there right now are Russians, so it's like Kaliningrad is never going to become part of Poland. It's not going to happen. Like, that's just no. Thank you, Pita Stack. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you, dude. Does Vietnam still have Agent Orange? No. If you're talking about like the chemical, for the most part, it's been cleaned up. But if you're talking about people that are born, with, defects from it, yes, that still happens. Do I know about Milosevic? You're talking about the dictator of Serbia? The one who did the Bosnian genocide? Have a good stream, Pro. I'm going to sleep now. Okay, I'll see you, Appalachian. Take care, dude. Oh, hey, Lucas. How are you doing, dude? Which Call of Duty do you think is worse? Black Ops 7 or Modern Warfare 3? Black Ops 7, yeah. Black Ops 7, definitely worst one. Well, one person about saying like capitalism is the free exchange of goods. One thing, guys, that I really hate that people do from like a history perspective. I've been here since 40,000 subs. Huge congratulations to all the milestones you hit and how you've come, man. Keep grinding. Thank you, dude. Here's one thing I'll tell you guys. One thing that I really hate that people do, because I've seen people do this a lot. There are people out there, and I'm sure the people watching this have seen this also before, especially in YouTube comments. But there are people out there that, for example, they say that imperialism is the same thing as capitalism. They say imperialism equals capitalism. They say it's the exact same thing. It is not the exact same thing. Here's the difference between imperialism and capitalism. Capitalism is a free market system. A system of free exchange of goods. You produce a product, you sell it to somebody, somebody buys a product, or you trade a product with somebody. That is essentially what capitalism is. People being able to make money and freely trade with other people. Imperialism is different. Imperialism is when one country decides to go into another country, invade it by force, occupy that country, steal that country's resources, and then loot that country, and then send it back to their home country. They either give the colony nothing, or they basically give the colony barely anything. They'll basically rip the colony off and basically, force them to basically, sell their resources to them for like the cheapest price possible, ripping them off. So that's not capitalism. That's basically taking over somebody else's economy and and controlling it. It's a controlled economy. It's mercantilism. That's what mercantilism is. And like for example, when America was a colony, that's actually one of the reasons that like the United States broke away from Britain, because Americans were actually victims of imperialism. Americans were actually getting scammed by Britain. So America lived under a mercantile system. So basically, what happened is if you lived in the 13 colonies before America became an independent country, when it was still part of Britain, right? If you lived in the 13 colonies, you were not allowed to buy any goods that were not from Britain. So if you tried to buy goods from France, if you tried to buy goods from Spain, you would actually get fined or arrested for that. You were not allowed to do that. You could not do that. You could only buy goods from Britain. And what Britain would do is Britain would not let the Americans produce. They wouldn't let the Americans produce a lot of stuff, build factories. Instead, what the British did was the British actually would be the ones who would produce stuff, and then they would sell it to the Americans and rip them off. That's what they would do. And a lot of the materials that they used to build that stuff, they would actually get from America. So what the British would do is they would build a lot of stuff from wood that they got in America, and then they would sell it to the Americans from American-made wood, and they would rip the Americans off. And so the Americans told you can't trade with anyone else. You can only buy from the mother country, Britain. That is, the Americans got pissed off at crap like that. That's one of the reasons the revolution happened. John Hancock, for example. John Hancock. I know a lot of people know him from Fallout 4, but he's based on the real life John Hancock, which John Hancock was a smuggler, and he basically had a warehouse in Boston, and he would basically bring in goods from like France, Spain, other places, and he would sell it in America for cheap. And so a lot of Americans saw him as a hero because he was fighting against the system, fighting against the British taxes, the British ridiculous policies of mercantilism, and giving people more of a fair deal. That's how John Hancock became rich, and that's how also John Hancock became famous. But that's it. So like imperialism and capitalism are not the same thing. People think it's the same thing. It's not. It's like imperialism is basically invading another country, stealing its stuff, where capitalism is basically a free exchange of goods between two countries. That's the difference between it. It's not the same thing. And how much more would the Brits charge? Double or triple what it should be. We are in grave danger of the communists. Our freedom, our very way of life is at risk. Yep, JFK in Black Ops 1, Nicholas. Do you think Vietnam is more economically free than China? I don't know about economically free, but I would say that Vietnam is more socially free than China. Because like when Americans visit Vietnam, they actually feel safe. They feel much more safe. Now Vietnam is not a democracy, it's still a dictatorship, but it is it's not as psycho. It's not like as psychotic as like China. Like China is way more psycho than Vietnam is. So like even Americans like visiting Vietnam, like a country that they were at war with 50, 60 years ago, they feel safe for the most part, visiting a country like that. So that shows you progress right there. But like China, on the other hand, a lot of Americans actually get scared visiting China. I'm excited for Ace Combat 8. Pro, do you know how Indonesia eradicates communism? I'm Indonesian. I remember you said you're happy Indonesia has no communism, but if you read how they eradicated it, even you will disagree. I'm assuming they probably used their militias, didn't they? They probably used their militias, and they were probably very violent, violent and extreme about it. That's probably how they dealt with it. Because if you've seen, for example, what the Indonesians did to the East Timorans, like the Indonesians did some really horrible things to the people of East Timor. So like I'm assuming you mean that the government was very brutal, but Yeah, it was in the 80s when they did some pretty horrible things in East Timor. Have you read the book Red Dead History? No, I haven't. The Last Roman. Do you think that that China annexing Taiwan is inevitable? Um, Here's what I'll say about that. China is eventually, good stream professional. I like hearing your commentary and you playing games. Well, thank you, Pones. My favorite band, I don't know Rammstein, but I know, my favorite band would probably be Sabaton. I don't really like, I don't really listen to that much music, but, about China and Taiwan, right? Here's what I'll say about that. China, is going to try to annex Taiwan. It's eventually going to happen. Now, we don't know when it's going to happen. If it's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years, we don't know. But they're eventually going to try. I think they will eventually try to do it. And the reason that I think that China will try to annex Taiwan is because Xi Jinping, who's a dictator of China, he is the most, brutal dictator that China has had in a long time. He's like, he has basically, like, completely taken over China. Like, whatever he says goes in China. And about Xi, Xi is obsessed with his legacy. That's what he's obsessed with. He is obsessed with his legacy. And he wants to leave a legacy in China. And one of the things that he has promised, you see, Xi Jinping has promised several times that I will reunify China with Taiwan, I'm sorry. So that's what he has said several times. And he is getting older and older as time is passing. And he cares about his legacy. He might get desperate and obsessed with that, how he's going to go down in history, and he might actually try to take Taiwan just because of that. And the reason that Xi is so obsessed with his legacy is because you have to look at China's history. China, what happened is China went through something called the Century of Humiliation. And what the Century of Humiliation in China was, it was in the mid-1800s all the way up until the end of World War II, so for 100 years. And what the Century of Humiliation is that China had been harassed by these European powers. Britain, France, Germany, and, like, Britain was the worst of them. Like, Britain, what they did was Britain started selling, like, opium in, like, Chinese cities, like British merchants. And then what the British would do is they would just tax the opium, and the Chinese basically tried to stop that, and then the British basically came in with warships and bombed them, and forced them to basically allow them to sell drugs. But China was embarrassed by a lot of these powers, and then Japan invaded. Japan invaded China 3 times. It invaded China in the Russo-Japanese... No, I think it was 4 times. It was 4 times. It was the Russo-Japanese War, and then there was also in the mid-1800s, there was the first Sino-Japanese War. Then there was also them invading Manchuria in the early 1930s, and they took over Manchuria, and then in 1937 they invaded the rest of China. So they got invaded by Japan like 3 times, and then there was the Civil War that went on with the communists and the nationalists, and then eventually when Mao Zedong took power, China was like, this is the end of the Century of Humiliation. China is going to be a great power again. The Chinese are really obsessed with this part of their history, the Century of Humiliation. And so that is one of the reasons that Xi Jinping is so obsessed with Taiwan also, because he cares about his legacy. Like, they're obsessed with Mao Zedong and how he unified China under communism, and Xi Jinping basically wants to go down in history the same as, like, Mao Zedong. He wants to, be that big guy that's going to unify, like, China and Taiwan. But here's the scary thing, what I'll tell you about China. If China wanted to take over, Taiwan, they could do it without an actual invasion. You know what they could do? They could just blockade the entire country. What China could do is China could actually take their navy and they could completely surround Taiwan. Just like completely surround it. Taiwan is not that big of an island. They just take their navy, they completely surround Taiwan. And Taiwan is a very urban country. It has some farms, but not that many. So Taiwan cannot rely on a domestic food source. They cannot just rely on food just only in their country. They would run out of it. And so China could basically just blockade them and basically just starve them out until they surrender. Now, how the rest of the world would react, how America would react, we don't know how America would react to that. I don't know on that what America would do in that situation. But that's what China would do. If China was to attack Taiwan, it wouldn't be like Chinese sending paratroopers into Taiwan or sending like boats and then like landing in like Taiwan and invading it with troops, so like a naval invasion. What they would do is they would basically take all their ships and they would just blockade Taiwan and they would starve them out until they surrender. That's what it is. And if China took Taiwan, this would also be really bad for the rest of the world, because a lot of the chips in computers are actually made in Taiwan, and if China controls that, the price of all electronics in the world is going to skyrocket. And, that is going to severely impact the West as well. And that's why one of the reasons the West doesn't want, Taiwan to fall too. Taiwan is about the size of Maryland, yeah. It's not a very large country, but it has more people than Maryland. Mao Zedong represented the people. The nationalists, otherwise known as the KMT, were military dictators. Mao worked with the peasants and rural villages in China, especially after the Long March. Mao Zedong killed millions of people. What are you talking about, dude? He literally he did the Great Leap Forward in his country, which that it was like the worst famine in China's history. It killed like 30 million people in the famine. He also had his secret police that would terrorize people. Like Mao was a piece of crap. Like he was a disgusting human being. When you were talking about mental health earlier, there's a YouTube channel of someone who works in Tokyo, explains his experience living in Japan, and shares his mental health. Oh, what's the name of the video, Brizo? And also, Mao Zedong had affairs with numerous women, and this one girl, Mao Zedong actually gave her an STD. And what happened was the father of this girl, he was so angry about that what he did was he actually wanted to write a letter to Mao Zedong cursing him out. And the mailman actually saw the letter, and the mailman actually said, "I'm not going to send this letter." And the father said, "Why?" And he said, "Because if I send this letter, both me and you are going to be dead."
Goodbye. Allons-y.
Like Mao was just a horrible person. He was just like an evil person. I know the nationalists weren't necessarily the good guys in China. It was a Kuomintang, if I'm pronouncing them correctly. But like the nationalists were, they weren't perfect. Like I said, they did bad crap, sure. But like comparing them to the atrocities of Mao, the nationalists did far less worse things than Mao did. Like Mao was just a complete psycho. You like Pones, I hope that you really read into Mao. I'm not trying to insult you or like attack you personally, but like you do not want to look up to a person like Mao Zedong. That is a very, very, very bad person. And I highly suggest you read about the Great Leap Forward and you read about the horrible things that he did, because he really destroyed China. He did some pretty horrible things. Thank you, Vapor Trails, for sponsoring my channel. Thank you, man. I think he was worse than Stalin. Well, it's debatable whether he's worse than Stalin. Stalin and Mao were definitely both really bad people. What I will say about Stalin and Mao is that there is one difference between Mao Zedong didn't brush his teeth either. Yeah, I did hear about that. Thank you, Shadow Narwhal. So here's the difference between Mao and Stalin. Stalin killed over 20 million people. That's how many people Stalin killed. Mao Zedong killed somewhere between 40 to 50 million people. But the difference between Mao and Stalin, even though Mao killed double the amount of people, is that most of the people that Mao killed, it wasn't executions. Most of the people that Stalin killed were executions. It was just purges. It was just mass murdering people. Most of the people that Mao killed, he killed through starvation. That's how it is. Famines. So that was the difference between Mao and Stalin, is that they both killed millions of people, and Mao terrorizes people too. But Mao's killings were most of his deaths were from starvation, where most of Stalin's deaths were from direct, murder. Where Mao did murder a ton of his own people too, but it was most of Mao's deaths were from direct starvation, where most of Stalin's deaths were from murders. Why do you have so much money in GT Online? It's grinded a long time. Thank you, Erish, for the the super chat. I think Czechoslovakia is an example of Soviet imperialism. You are 100% right on that. So Stalin is worse in your opinion? I never said that Stalin was worse. Honestly, I think they're both equally evil. I was just saying that most of Mao's deaths were from starvation, but most of Stalin's deaths were from direct murders. Do you think the Soviet Union contributed to humanity? Not really, no. What I will say is that, look, the one contribution that I will give the Soviet Union is that the Soviets were instrumental in helping to defeat the Nazis. That I will, like, they did most of the heavy fighting on the Eastern Front. I will give it to them on that. And they were, like, a huge reason on why the Nazis lost World War II. That was, like, their biggest accomplishment. But at the same time did they really free those countries that they occupied? No, they didn't. They just basically just created communist puppet dictatorship governments in those new countries that they occupied. They didn't really liberate those countries from the Nazis. They did help defeat the Nazis, which ended up helping, the freer countries also in the West. But that's what I'll say about that.
I lost another stack of dollars at cards last night. Oh boy, damn losing streak. Well, now ain't that just...
Pones, Mao Zedong admired Stalin. And when the Soviet Union actually de-Stalinized, Mao got really angry about that. And here's the thing is, Khrushchev actually warned Mao about the Great Leap Forward. He told him, don't do that. Khrushchev was the leader of the Soviet Union after Stalin. He told Mao, don't do the Great Leap Forward. It will destroy China. And Khrushchev knows about this because Khrushchev was Stalin's right-hand man. And Khrushchev saw what Stalin's collectivization did in Ukraine. So what Stalin did is Lenin was not a good man, but Lenin was a much more intelligent leader than Stalin was. Like, Stalin was just like an idiot. Like, Lenin was a much more intelligent leader than Stalin was. And one of the reasons that Lenin was more intelligent was because Lenin did not do Lenin didn't completely abolish private property. He didn't. Where Stalin did. Stalin completely abolished private property in the Soviet Union. So what Lenin did is, after the revolution, he gave poor farmers land. So after the revolution, a lot of farmers actually got free land from the government. And that was their land. That was their land that they were going to farm on. After Lenin died, what Stalin basically did was he basically said, no, we are not going to have any kind of private small farms. The government is going to take over everything. And what he did was he collectivized everything. And he basically sent his secret police to basically enforce this. And what happened was, there was this group of people in Ukraine called the kulaks, and Ukraine was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. It was where most of their farms were. And the kulaks were not rich people. They were not. Like, the Soviet propaganda says the kulaks were rich people. They weren't. The kulaks were just peasants that were just better off. Like, they were just poor people that had just a little bit more than the average Soviet, but they weren't rich people by any means. And so what the Soviets did was, Stalin's secret police, they went on these farms and they basically told people, you are going to give us, 80% of your crops to the government. And the kulaks were basically like, no, F this. Like, we work this land, we sweat on this land, we work this land every, all day. You're not going to take 80% of our, grain. You're not going to do stuff like that. And how did Stalin respond for that? Stalin said, okay, if you're not going to share, you're not going to get anything. And so what he did was he completely cut them off. He had soldiers block all the roads, and the farmers couldn't get their grain out. And what the farmers did was, if the farmers tried to leave the farm, they would get shot. If they stayed on the farm, they would starve to death. Most of the farmers tried to hold out on the farms, and they starved to death. And then when the farmers died, there was nobody to produce the food in the cities in Ukraine, and then all the people in the cities in Ukraine were just dropping dead and dying. And what happened was, to this day, we still don't know how many people died in the Holodomor. And so it was some people say it was between 7 to 11 million people. And that was in 1 year, in 1933. 7 to 11 million people died of starvation because it was Stalin's stupid policy, Stalin's dumb crap that basically had caused this stuff. And here's something that I'll tell you guys about this that's really creepy. A couple years after the Holodomor happened, that's that mass starvation in Ukraine, where millions of people died, when the Soviet government was doing their census, right? They were basically just seeing how many people live in each part of the Soviet Union. They were doing a census in Ukraine, and they were seeing how many people live in Ukraine. The census was millions less people, so it was millions less people were on the census than beforehand. And the reason there was millions less people, because they died of starvation. They all starved to death. And the thing is, the census people didn't know about the famine. They didn't know that all these people had starved to death, and they knew that there was something wrong with the numbers. And what they did was they went to Stalin and they said, "There's something wrong with the numbers. There is millions of less people than there was a couple years ago. Something's not right here." You know what Stalin did? He had the people doing the census shot. That's what he did. So that's the type of person that Stalin was. Stalin was a real, scumbag and a real, piece of crap. And Khrushchev, the guy who ended up taking over after Stalin, he saw that happening. He saw that what that forced collectivization did, where the government basically just takes over everything. And so he tried to warn Mao. He told Mao, "Don't do this. Don't, force collectivize all the farms. We did this in the Soviet Union. It caused mass starvation. Millions of people died. Don't do this." And, Mao basically said, "You're an anti-Stalinist. You're not going to tell us what to do in China." And he just, brushed Khrushchev off. And then what did he do? He did forced collectivization, and it caused mass starvation. Millions of people died. It was just absolutely horrible. It was disgusting. And what China did is China did these commune farms where everybody would basically live together on these farms, and they would basically just share the food. And even the food on the farms ran out. And even the farmers themselves, they starved. So it was, Mao was just an idiot and a real, real horrible person. I mean, Lenin was also worse too. Lenin was a bad guy. I'm not defending Lenin. I'm not saying that he was a good person. The only thing I'm saying about Lenin is Lenin was a smarter leader than Stalin was. I didn't say that Lenin was a good person. I just said he was a smarter leader than Stalin was, because at least Lenin allowed some private property. He at least allowed farmers to own private farms in the Soviet Union, where Stalin didn't allow that. Stalin basically tried to do forced collectivization and just destroyed, everything. Speaking of China, do you know Laowi 86 and Serpent Say? Is it? I don't know the Laowi guy, but I think I know the Serpent Say guy. Isn't that the guy who was correct me if I'm wrong? Wasn't he the South African guy that lives in China? Wasn't that him? He was like a South African guy who lived in China, and then he moved out. Dude, relax the political. It's not really a political rant. It was just more talking about history. I was just more talking about, how psycho Stalin was, and like all of this other stuff, and these here's really appreciate all the information provided regarding the business production boost and mansion security. It helped a lot, Patrick. Thank you, Vapor. What about Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il? Kim Il Sung was a bit of a psycho. Kim Il Sung was the one who started the Korean War, and so millions of people died because of him, because he started that stupid war. So he can be blamed for that. But one thing I will say about Kim Il Sung is Kim Il Sung was not as bad as Kim Jong Il. Kim Jong Il was actually worse than him, and one of the reasons that Kim Il Sung wasn't as bad as Kim Jong Il was because Kim Il Sung grew up poor. So he at least, I guess, had more sympathy towards the poor, but he was also a very brutal guy. If you want to know how brutal Kim Il Sung was, this is Kim Jong Un's grandpa. There was a North Korean general that he didn't get along with. I forget the guy's name, but he didn't like him. And what Kim Il Sung did was he had the guy tied to a tree, and then they fired mortars at him and just blew up his body, just destroyed him really badly. And what he did was he had left his body in Kim Il Sung Square in Pyongyang, like this destroyed body of this general, just so that everybody would see, this is what happens, when you piss off Kim Il Sung. So, that's the type of person that Kim Il Sung was. He was a pretty brutal guy. Kim Jong Il, his son, grew up in luxury, wealth. He was just a very privileged, elitist person. He was just a scumbag. Yeah, and I'm gonna do a video talking about all the features of the mansion, including the snack bowls, also Vapor.
You won't believe it. I found a gold nugget the other day and lost it right after. Well, good gracious.
Well, I think that the new Call of Duty game should have been a sequel to Black Ops 6. It should have been in the early 2000s. That's what it should have been.
Can you believe Miss Wilson has raised the
Yeah, but I don't know if that was really a contribution to humanity, W fan.
What's this place coming to? Well then.
Do you know anything about the Ukrainian insurgent army in World War II? I've heard about them. They defended Ukraine, if I'm if I'm not wrong, but committed mass atrocities in Poland. I searched more. Yes, about them. The Ukrainian insurgent army, they're called UPA. That was what they were called, and they were led by this guy called Stefan Bandera. And Bandera was a criminal. He was a mass murderer. He was an evil man. He was a terrorist in Poland. He had committed numerous terrorist attacks in Poland before World War II had happened. And the Polish government had actually had him locked up. And what happened is when the Nazis invaded, they basically released him from prison, and they had him make a collaborationist army. So he basically made an army that collaborated with the Nazis. And when the Nazis basically thought they didn't need him anymore, they betrayed him. And so and the reason for that is because the Nazis always saw Slavs as inferior. So anybody else is Slavic, the Nazis saw them as inferior. So what the Nazis did was they had UPA work with them, and UPA committed atrocities on behalf of the Nazis. And then when the Nazis thought that they didn't need them anymore, they actually betrayed them and had a lot of them killed too. But what happened is the UPA's worst crime is the Volyn genocide. And what the Volyn genocide was, it was in 1943, and it was mid-1943. At that point, the Soviets had won Stalingrad, and the Germans were being pushed out. They were on the retreat. The Germans had also just lost at Kursk in July 1943, the largest tank battle in history. So the Germans were being pushed back, and the Soviets were advancing on them. And parts of Ukraine and eastern Poland basically became no man's land, where neither the Soviets nor the Germans controlled it. And who filled that gap was the UPA, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. And what UPA basically did was a lot of these villages that had that were in eastern Poland and western Ukraine, there were a lot of Polish villages in there. UPA, what they did was they went into these villages and they just mass murdered all the Polish people, just killing everyone in these villages. And this was really brutal, like really bad. What these guys did is they came into these villages with axes, and they would butcher women. They would cut kids' heads off. That's what they would do. Little children, they would kill them with axes. That's what the UPA soldiers did. They were extremely brutal, horrible. And what happened was a lot of the German soldiers, when they actually went into these villages and they saw, like, kids with their heads cut off, they were just horrified about that. So even the German army was just, completely horrified about that. They thought that the Soviets did it at first, but they didn't realize that it was actually UPA in the area that was actually doing that stuff. And if you want to know how many people did UPA kill, UPA killed somewhere between 100 to 200,000 Polish people in that region. And here's what the here's something that's really horrible, and a lot of people don't know about this because of this today. But the current government of Ukraine, like modern Ukraine, they actually consider Stefan Bandera a national hero. The guy who actually led those guys that collaborated with the Nazis and had basically just mass murdered all of those people, all those Polish people, they consider him a national hero, the government of Ukraine. A lot of people don't know this. The media hasn't really talked about this, but it is true that the government of Ukraine does consider him a national hero. Like Ukrainian, textbooks, history textbooks actually say that this guy was a national hero who fought for Ukraine's independence and Ukraine's freedom, when the guy was a mass murderer. He was a terrorist. He was a monster. He worked with the Nazis and he, butchered Polish people. He was just like a piece of crap. And Bandera also killed his own people. He also killed Ukrainian Jews. He hated Jewish people. And so if you were a Ukrainian Jew, the UPA would kill you as well. So UPA were really, really brutal people. There were some really, really evil, bad people. But the really crazy thing about this is there is so many statues in Ukraine to Bandera and UPA. Like the Ukrainian Insurgent Army has so many statues dedicated to him. So many. And Poland has gotten really pissed off at Ukraine about this. And the current president of Ukraine, he was actually asked in an interview several years ago, what he thinks of UPA and Bandera, and he said, some people consider Bandera a hero, other people consider him a villain. He didn't specifically say what his opinion was. And the reason that he was doing that was because he wasn't trying to piss off the Ukrainian nationalists. So there are some of these Ukrainian ultranationalists that worship this Bandera guy, and Bandera, he is a very, very, very bad, evil person. Very, very horrible person. But that's one. A lot of people don't know about that. They don't know about that. Ukraine does have a pretty dark history with Bandera. He did some pretty bad things during World War II.
Levi's crop short again. Wonder what they'll say this time.
I heard that too.
Bro, there is an argument that the Soviets deserved the liberated lands after losing nearly 30 million people to the Nazis. What do you think this argument is? BS. Because these countries didn't attack the Soviet Union. Like, no, it's BS. Stalin also improved education, which gave Russia more engineers and scientists. Russia made their own nuke thanks to Operation Paperclip, but America did too. Look, here's what I'll tell you about Stalin. And I told this story before, but there was this guy called Lavrentiy Beria. And Beria was basically Stalin's one of Stalin's right-hand men. He was actually in charge of the secret police. Now, do you know what Beria actually did? What Beria did was he would drive around Moscow in his limousine in the middle of night. And what he would do is he would look for women that were walking by themselves. And if he saw a woman that was walking by herself that he liked, he would force her into his limo. And then what he would do is he would rape that woman. And afterwards, what he would do is he would take that woman and then he would drop her off at her apartment or her house. And do you know what he would do at that point? He would give them a bouquet of flowers. If the woman took the bouquet of flowers, he would let them go. If the woman did not take the bouquet of flowers, he would send them to a gulag. And the reason that the bouquet of flowers was to say that there was consent. That was the whole reason for it when it was clearly rape. And he killed a lot of women doing this. And what happened is Stalin knew about this. Stalin knew that his right-hand guy was doing this. Stalin knew that he was driving around kidnapping women and raping them. He knew this and killing them. So Stalin was fully aware that his right-hand man was doing this. So when you're telling me, Stalin, he fixed education, he did, good in the Soviet Union, he knew that this guy was going around raping women, and, Stalin is the most powerful man in the Soviet Union. If Stalin wanted to, he could have had this guy shot for what he was doing, but he didn't. Because this guy was very loyal to Stalin, and that's all Stalin cared about. Stalin cared that this guy was loyal to him, and he didn't care that this guy was, raping and killing innocent women. Now, what ends up happening is Stalin's daughter went to Beria's house, and when Stalin found out about this, Stalin phone called Beria, and when Beria answered the phone, Stalin said to him, "You better not touch my daughter, or if you do, I'm gonna kill you." And then what happened was Stalin's daughter actually left, and Stalin didn't do anything about that. Stalin did not still punish him. He still let him go around, raping and killing innocent women. So only when it was his daughter, he only cared, but he didn't care when he was just driving around raping and, killing innocent women. And so that was the type of person that Stalin was. Stalin let that guy do that. So that's it. So when I hear people defending Stalin, saying, "Oh, Stalin did some good things," no. Stalin is literally one of the most evil people on this planet in history. If I had to make a history, video, the top 10 most evil people that existed, I'm telling you, Stalin would 100% be on that list. So that is, Stalin is an absolute monster. This is one of the most evil people that has ever existed in human history. Be very happy that this guy does not exist anymore. This guy's been dead for a long time. What's your opinion on Edward Snowden? Many sides claim many things. What is the truth? When what I think about Edward Snowden is I think that Edward Snowden should be allowed to come back to America. I don't think that there's anything wrong with what he did. I think that the people that are charging him with crimes, I think those people are the traitors, because they accuse Snowden of being a traitor, but I think the people who are accusing him of being a traitor are actually the traitors themselves, because he was protecting the Constitution. Because what they were doing is they were violating the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment does, protect you from privacy. People say that that doesn't give you privacy. It does. It's the illegal search and seizures. That's what it does. It prevents government from overreach of illegal search and seizures. And they were basically just spying on people, reading their emails without warrants, following people, listening to their phone calls. And that was, yeah, so that's what I say. Snowden was disgusted with that. He didn't like that stuff. And what he did was he exposed that stuff to the world. And then he had to flee, and he's living in Russia right now. He's been living in Russia for how many years? It's been over a decade. He hasn't been able to come back to America in a decade. And he doesn't want to live in a place like Russia. He doesn't want to live in a dictatorship like Russia. He wants to, come back to America. He's an American. I think he should be able to come back to America. So, if I was president, I would pardon him personally. I think he should be allowed to come back to the country. Uh, let me see here. No, I don't know who that is, Pep. How knowledgeable are you about King Leopold? Are you talking about the Belgian king who did the genocide in the Congo, who killed over 2 million Congo people? That's who Leopold was. Leopold was a horrible, despicable person. Leopold, when we take dictators out of the equation, if we are just looking strictly at monarchies, just kings and queens, right? Leopold is probably the most evil king in European history. Probably, I think he probably is. When you think about that, if he's not the most evil king, he's definitely in the top 5 most evil European kings. Definitely on that. Leopold, what this guy basically did was he invaded the Congo in Africa, took it as a colony, and what he did was he had the most psychotic form of slavery, and like in the Congo, where in the Congo, if you were a slave in the Congo and they said that you weren't working, if they said that you were taking breaks or you were too slow, you know what they would do? The Belgians would cut your hands off. That's what they would do as punishment. So if they said you're going too slow, they'd cut your hands off. And he killed 2 million people in the Congo. And that's why if you look at like pictures on Google about like if you go on Google, it's really disturbing pictures. But if you look up like pictures of people in the Congo in Belgian occupied Congo, you'll see so many people with no hands, and that's because they got cut off by Leopold's soldiers. So that guy was, and the thing is, if you look at a picture of what Leopold looks like, he even looks evil just from his picture. He's like looks like the most stereotypical evil king. Like if you just look at what he looks like this fat guy with this beard, he's just like he even looks evil. So he was very, very bad person. One of the reasons why I hate monarchies, because it's a bunch of just elitist, privileged people born into a specific family to think that they can rule over others. When Stalin defenders argue that he did a few good things, they refuse to acknowledge he did them out of pragmatism, not out of honor or compassion. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Oh, I know about that vapor. I know that the yoga gives you a speed boost. I know about that. That I know. Yes, Serpent's moved out. He's now in the USA together with Lao Wai. Is his friend, and Lowie's from New York. They call Great Leap Forward, Great Leap Backward. Yeah. No, I don't really make political videos. I'll sometimes comment about like history and stuff like, because I like history. I like reading a lot. I do read a lot, and so that I enjoy. But I don't make videos history. No, they aren't, Zach. There's no doubt that America had slavery. It did. But and it was horrible when that happened. But no American president has done anything close to what Leopold has done. There was, sure there was bad and evil American presidents, but there was never an American president that did what Leopold did to that extent. So like, what Leopold did was what Leopold did was just, one of the it was just, it was a complete genocide. It was disgusting. It was brutal. It was hard. Absolute pure evil. Napoleon, what do you know about him? Napoleon was a very interesting figure. Where Napoleon wasn't really a king; he was more of a dictator. That's more of what he was like. Napoleon hated this aristocratic royal privilege, which that's one of the reasons people like him. He hated the privileges of the aristocracy. He believed that people should be promoted based on merit, not based on these aristocratic titles. Hey Lucas, have I read Zhuge Liang's strategy book? No, what is that? What about Mussolini? He's evil as well. Oh yeah, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia and he used chemical weapons on the Ethiopians in the mid 30s. It was the Mussolini was really bad. That is true. Mussolini was a socialist. Yes, he was. He stopped being a socialist during World War One because he thought that Italy could gain glory in battle, and the socialists were against World War One. No, I sometimes play Reddit Online in first person. How many people did Genghis Khan kill? It's very difficult to estimate exactly how many people Genghis Khan killed because there's battles where armies are fighting against armies and soldiers die, and so is that kills counted towards him because it's just soldiers versus soldiers. But if you're talking about people that are people he specifically murdered, like he killed, ordered and did executions, it's got to be in the millions. But we don't it's probably gonna, because of that time period, it's also gonna be much more difficult. Like for example, like modern dictators, we have a pretty good idea on the people that they killed because it's in modern times. We have a lot of witnesses to that too. Like Hitler, Stalin, these type of people. We know how many people they killed. It's more closer to modern history. But like when you go back 800, 900 years ago, like people like Genghis Khan, it's a lot more difficult to ascertain exactly how many people that they had killed. But about Genghis Khan was a very weird person. He was a very weird leader. The reason that he was so weird is because Genghis Khan opposed torture. He said that torture was wrong. He made laws that were against torture, but yet his soldiers constantly engaged in torture. Like Mongolian soldiers would constantly torture victims. So even though he himself said that he was against torture, he didn't really do anything to stop his armies from doing that. He believed in freedom of religion. He didn't discriminate people based on their religion. He didn't think less of people because of their religion. He was the one of the creepiest things about Genghis Khan is that he had so many affairs with so many women, and he has like 20 million descended relatives. So that's what's so insane. He had like over 1,000 kids. The other thing about Genghis Khan, one of the most disgusting things that Genghis Khan did, like one of the most worst things he did, is he took over this city in China, and there was a woman who actually swallowed a bunch of expensive pearls, and she told him that she would vomit the pearls if he let her go. But you know what he did instead? He actually killed that woman and cut open her stomach to get the pearls. And then you know what he did? He had the soldiers round up all the Chinese women in that city and cut open their stomachs to see if they had pearls inside them too. And surprise, nobody else had pearls inside their stomach, and he killed a bunch of women for nothing. So that's what I'll say about Genghis Khan. Is he was a very weird guy. He was brutal. There were some things that he had good views in, but then there was other things that he was like really extreme and violent in. Like Genghis Khan also did support women's more rights for women. Like he wasn't like where he believed that like men and women were completely equal, but he was actually very progressive for his time, where he believed that like women should be able to own property, that they should be able to divorce their husbands. That's what he believed in. He believed in stuff like that. So what Genghis Khan also did was Genghis Khan actually had a council. So he wasn't really a monarch. He was a dictator, but he had like a council, and his council was basically a bunch of advisors that would basically tell him what they thought, and for the most part they could speak freely. Even if he didn't like what they could say, they spoke freely for the most part. It wasn't like Hitler or Stalin where people were basically scared to say what they wanted. Like Genghis Khan for the most part was like open to criticism, where like other dictators they weren't. But on Genghis Khan's council, he also had women that would advise him. So that's what about it. If anybody's ever played Fallout New Vegas, you know how in Fallout New Vegas the Great Khans, you know how they have like that council that they sit around and they basically advise the Khan on what to do? That is exactly how Genghis Khan ran his government. That's what the Great Khans are based on. It's based on that system. They had like a council, and people would sit in like a table around him, and they would give him advice on what he should do next and stuff like that. Yeah, a lot of people are descendants of him, Polly. Have you ever heard the story of Henry VIII, who got married 6 times? 2 of them he had executed. Yes. That guy was a psycho. And I think that's the reason that he actually broke the he broke the British Catholic or English Catholic Church, because England was a Catholic country still at that point. But he had his first wife, and he was obsessed with having a son as an heir. He didn't want to have a daughter as an heir. He wanted to have a son, and he had numerous pregnancies with his wife, and his wife just kept giving him daughters, and he basically blamed his wife for this. And he demanded that the Pope give him a divorce, but the Pope refused because in the Catholic Church there's no such thing as divorce. Divorce is forbidden. You're married in front of God, and that's what the Catholics believe. So the Pope did not want to give him a divorce. He got pissed, and what he did was he had his wife executed. He said, "Okay, if you won't give me a divorce, I'll just kill my wife," and he had her head cut off. Then he had a second wife, and she just kept giving him daughters as well. And he wanted a male heir. He blamed his wife for it. The Pope wouldn't give him a divorce again, so he basically just had her head cut off again and killed her too, and then married a third time. And that's what I think that's how he broke England away from the Catholic Church. I think specifically with that, because the Pope excommunicated him. I think that's what happened. But here's the crazy thing about Henry. He ended up dying, and his daughter ended up taking over. So he eventually had a son, but his son actually died young, and his daughter ended up taking over. So his worst nightmare was that his daughter would be his successor, and that's what ended up happening. So that was the he didn't kill his first wife. It wasn't his first wife. Well, I know he killed 2 of his wives, but that was it. Yeah, that guy was a psycho. On what specifically, Pep? Who was the person that Stalin was the most afraid of? Tito. Tito, the dictator of Yugoslavia. Stalin tried to have him assassinated several times. Every single assassin failed. And Tito sent him a letter and said to him that we have already, stopped numerous assassins, one with a bomb, one with a rifle. If you send one more, I will send my men to Moscow, and I won't have to send another one. To a degree, Zach, the Great Khans have their own government and their own, system. Where raiders, for the most part, don't have their own government. He divorced the first, and the second got executed. Okay, Pep. Why were these women marrying him to begin with? Political pressure. Marrying the king would give any kind of family extreme power. Women in that time period didn't really choose who they married. Yes, Vito, what is your Steam? Idi Amin was an evil dictator, horrible guy, destroyed Uganda. When he invaded Tanzania, that was the end of his regime. His regime failed. Do you know something about Idi Amin? Idi Amin was still using Shermans when he invaded Tanzania. So he invaded Tanzania in like the late 70s, and he was using Shermans when he did that, and it was a disaster. The Tanzanians blew up all the Shermans, and then they invaded Uganda. No, I still will this month, Zach. Ironically, Queen Elizabeth was one of the best at monarch in history. Also, his son was king for a bit. Thank you, American Loyalist, for the super chat. This DoorDash lady put pepper spray in the food. Yeah, I'm probably going to make a crazy current events video talking about that. I know about that. Oh, that's horrible, Pep. But I think I'm gonna wrap up the stream here, guys. It's really late at night. It's almost 3:30 in the morning for me, so I'm just exhausted. I think I'm gonna end the stream here. That's okay. I'm gonna have a lore video probably later tomorrow, talking about Faber. So thank you guys for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed the stream today. If you did, you drop a like, and I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you again for hanging out with me. I hope you guys all have a great week, and we'll stream again on Sunday.